Chapter 251. Lin Baipai looked understanding. I know you're suffering, but no one understands you. Okay, throw her into the lab and cut her up for research. She's not afraid of the zombie virus, so she'll definitely help us develop a vaccine. Look at her. She's so happy. The system felt obliged to explain. This uncle likes to sacrifice himself, and he's especially a saint. By Wei Wei. So the heartthrob temperament, is it to trick me? Her plan wasn't that heavy. She just wanted to get the vaccine and make Song Yunhuan misunderstand that she was running away for a few days. Then, after she got the vaccine, Song Yunhuan came looking for her. She showed him the vaccine. The misunderstanding was cleared, and his favorability rose. Then Song Yunhuan would mature. In the end, it seemed off track. Wei Wei Bai squatted in the cage. The researchers were already sharpening their knives. Because they were going to experiment, they all wore dark goggles. The system said helplessly, the goggles block their vision. The heartthrob subtitles don't have much effect on them. Bai Wei Wei held her head. Why does this thing rely on subtitles for the effect? This is too much of a pit for the host. There were a few zombies locked up next to them. The researchers began to dissect the zombies. It was a scary scene. Wei Wei Bai's face paled. Those rotten intestines, livers, and organs. Those rotten legs, feet, fingers, and whatnot. How was she going to eat? This kind of trauma would make her starve for at least 3 meals. One of the researchers walked to the cage and put the goggles around his neck. How about we study this girl first? Cut off one of her legs, big brother. Wei Wei Bai smiled sweetly. The researcher paused, then his face turned red. Then, let's take some blood first. It's okay. The wound is small. It'll be fine after a little medicine. Then he walked away, smiling dizzily. The heartthrob was actually quite useful. But before the researcher could draw the blood, the wall suddenly collapsed. Cracks spread out like spider webs on the reinforced, shell-proof wall. In the next second, the wall collapsed, creating a huge gap. A figure slowly walked in. Zombies! A researcher screamed. These were his last words before he died. His head fell to the ground. Then, that figure walked gracefully and reached out to pull off another person's arm. The man screamed and rolled on the ground. So noisy. He took a step forward and stomped on his face, causing his brain matter to splatter all over the floor. It was quiet. The rest of the researchers had their stomachs cut open, their eyes dug out, and their bones crushed. In less than a minute, the entire laboratory had turned into a bloody and terrifying battlefield. No one survived. Wei Wei Bai and the system were speechless. What should he do? This was too terrifying. He had nothing to say. He stepped on the bloody corpses and came to Wei Wei Bai's cage. Wei Wei, how does it feel to be betrayed? She wanted to escape and seek protection from others. He simply let the zombies bite her a few times so that she wouldn't be afraid of the secret of the zombie virus being exposed. She was sent to the laboratory. He must be in despair and pain. Just like him. Wei Wei Bai's voice trembled. Let me explain, she said as she felt for her pocket. Left, nothing. Right, nothing. What was that? She knocked on the system. Why is my vaccine gone? System, I think your pocket was too shallow. You dropped it when you were dragged in. Wei Wei Bai, if I had known, I would have held it in my chest. At least I would have felt it when it fell. Then she slowly looked up and saw Song Yunhuan standing outside the cage. He showed a calm, but scalp-numbing smile. Explain. What do you want to explain? After he finished speaking, he gently pried open the iron bars of the cage and walked into the cage. Then Song Yunhuan reached out and held her pale face. His smile gradually twisted. I finally found you, Wei Wei. / to make it easier for you to read next time, you can click at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 252. Wei Wei Bai felt that his hands were terrifyingly cold. His eyes were so cold that it made her scalp numb. Her voice trembled. I just want to get the vaccine here. Song Yunhuan, you have to believe me. Song Yunhuan's fingers rubbed against her face. He smiled terrifyingly. Really? I clearly saw you running around happily with that girl called Lin Xiao. Furthermore, aren't you two getting married? Wei Wei Bai, rumors kill people. Song Yunhuan lowered his head, his bangs covering his red eyes. His handsome face had a devilish smile. His voice was dark and cold. You know what? I hate being lied to. As soon as he said this, a huge force suddenly appeared, squeezing Wei Wei Bai's iron cage. The iron bars of the cage twisted. Wei Wei Bai groaned, as if she'd been punched in the chest. It was so uncomfortable that she wanted to vomit. Song Yunhuan looked at her coldly. He had thousands of ways to torture her. He increased the pressure in the air. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but tremble. She gasped and opened her mouth, but she couldn't get any air. Just when she thought she was going to die from lack of oxygen, the pressure in the air suddenly disappeared. She relaxed her body, gasping for breath. But before she could catch her breath, Song Yunhuan grabbed the back of her head and kissed her fiercely. He clearly wanted to torture her to death. But why did he let her go in the end and let her live? Song Yunhuan bit her lip. His sharp teeth dug into her flesh, and blood flowed out. The sweet smell of blood made him even crazier. He kept denying this thought in his heart. He didn't like Wei Wei Bai that much. He wouldn't put any more feelings into this woman. He couldn't really like her. Song Yunhuan licked the blood from her lips. His fingers gripped her arm, almost wanting to break it. Wei Wei Bai's face turned white from the pain. She couldn't help but struggle. Her struggle angered Song Yunhuan even more. He grabbed the back of her head and grabbed her long hair. Wei Wei Bai's scalp was about to explode. She wanted to dodge but couldn't. She wanted to struggle but couldn't. Song Yunhuan licked the blood off her lips. His tongue suddenly entered her mouth and began to ravage her mouth. His strength was extremely rough, and he completely disregarded whether the other party could withstand his crazy entanglement. Wei Wei Bai felt that she might be the first woman in history to be kissed to death by a man. She struggled to free her hand and tried to grab the twisted iron bar beside her, trying to avoid this terrible kiss. Song Yunhuan suddenly let go and let her escape. Wei Wei Bai was just about to turn around and dodge when she paused. Song Yunhuan didn't seem like a good person. Would he let her run away again? Sure enough, just as she had this thought, the clothes on her back were torn apart by his sharp nails. The cold fingernails were so hard and sharp that they didn't seem like human hands. Wei Wei Bai was startled. She reached out and grabbed the clothes in front of her chest. Her entire back was exposed, leaving only a piece of cloth in front of her chest. Song Yunhuan's kiss had already landed on her back. This kiss was cold and hissing, just like the tongue of a venomous snake. After the cold, there was a sharp pain. His teeth dug into the flesh of her back. Wei Wei Bai didn't dare move. Her voice trembled. Song Yunhuan, calm down. She was going to be eaten, and eaten raw. Such a strong taste. Wei Wei Bai thought that she must have walked into the wrong scene. He laughed coldly. I'm very calm. I can't wait to break your limbs and devour you. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. The is at https://m.sashu.com//. Chapter 253. You can search Transmigration System. Prince Charming, come to search book www.sashu.com in Baidu to find the. After saying that, he grabbed her shoulder and pulled her back with a tug. Bai Weiwei's entire body lay powerlessly on the ground. She looked up in despair. Song Yunhuan, I like you. This sentence completely enraged Song Yunhuan. How could she say this after running away from him? With such serious eyes, such a clean voice. To lie to him. Song Yunhuan chuckled. He didn't know if he was laughing at Wei Wei Bai's stupidity and naivety, or was he laughing at himself, knowing that she was a liar. But his heart softened again. As he laughed, he reached out and tore off the rest of her clothes. What do you like about me? What do you like about a monster like me? How could you use liking to lie to me? Wei Wei Bai, how could you be so cruel as to lie to a man? She kept saying that she liked him, but it was just to survive. Because of the apocalypse, she had no choice but to rely on him to please him. Once she found a better choice, she ran away without looking back. How could he be stupid enough to fall for her? Wei Wei Bai's clothes were all stripped off. She was like a poor little lamb under Song Yunhuan's feet. But even at this point, she still held on to him. She was still gripping his hand tightly. Her eyes were filled with grief, her face was pale, and her voice was filled with struggling sobs. Can't you believe me? I just want you to become a human. Can you lie to me about liking me? Song Yunhuan reached out and pinched her cheek, silencing her voice. Lie to me? Aren't you lying to me every day? His eyes were filled with ruthlessness, without a trace of humanity. Greedy for life, afraid of death, vain, fickle. Isn't a woman like you the best at lying to men? The dim light in Wei Wei Bai's eyes dissipated with his vicious words, finally disappearing. She lay there quietly, her body as white as snow, her long hair spread out enchantingly, miserable but beautiful. Song Yunhuan was like an enraged beast, his appetite and lust rising. He couldn't wait to eat her. More than that, he wanted nothing more than to possess her and make the scent of someone else disappear from her body. She began to struggle helplessly, unable to speak. Song Yunhuan's face, under the white light, had a chilling cruelty. Didn't you say you like me? Then you must like the way I treat you. Tears welled up in her eyes. Her eyes were filled with extreme pain, but there was also the determination to stake everything on this one throw. Song Yunhuan grabbed her thigh, forcing her to open her legs. Suddenly, Wei Wei Bai's body spasmed. It was caused by severe pain. The air was filled with the smell of blood. It was so sweet that it was different from the others. Song Yunhuan froze, stopping all his movements. He lowered his head and finally saw the stubbornness in her eyes, as well as the fragility that was close to breaking down. She clutched her abdomen tightly, and in the middle of her palm was half a sharp iron bar. When he used his power just now, some of the iron bars couldn't withstand it and twisted into pieces, and the half in her hand was as sharp as a knife, stabbing straight into Song Yunhuan's heart. When did she get it? Song Yunhuan's mind was blank. He let go of the hand that was pinching her cheek. She gasped, then suddenly started laughing. Song Yunhuan, I like you. As she spoke, she stabbed the iron bar harder into her abdomen, as if she didn't feel pain. Song Yunhuan finally trembled. Wei Wei Bai's eyes were sharp and helpless. She said each word with a weak tone. Are you satisfied with me like this? Satisfied? He really did want her to die. But blood flowed all over the floor. She used all her strength to finish the sentence, and finally couldn't take it anymore. She closed her eyes and fainted. Song Yunhuan stared at her blankly. Suddenly, his heart felt like it had been hit hard. The pain came without warning. Even his lips couldn't help but tremble. But why didn't he feel happy at all? Download the https://www.sashu.com/ download the full article. https://www.sashu.com download the full article. https://www.sashu.com download the full article. https://m.sashu.com//the. Chapter 254. Wei Wei. His hand gently pushed her hand aside, about to take out the iron bar in her abdomen. Suddenly, there was a boom and the laboratory exploded. Outside the laboratory, a group of people cheered. They had finally killed a powerful zombie. But the next second, a figure holding a person quickly walked out of the fire. When the fire met him, the space around it distorted and automatically moved aside. Song Yunhuan's eyes were red, the person in his arms tightly wrapped. He was like a cornered beast, walking out of the fire. Before the people outside could attack, he suddenly raised his head and howled. The zombies were shaken. No matter how far they were, they quickly rushed over to attack the humans. The zombie wave erupted again, and this time, the scale of the zombie wave was bigger than any previous attack, more terrifying. All the zombies felt the call and madly attacked the base. Song Yunhuan had already disappeared with Wei Wei Bai. Song Yunhuan didn't go back to his home. After Wei Wei Bai ran away, he smashed basically everything in the house that could be smashed. Because when he saw the sofa, he thought of her. When he saw the kitchen, he thought of her. When he saw the dress, he thought of her. Everything he saw was her. The whole house was filled with traces of her. When he was used to being alone, he didn't find it hard. But when Wei Wei Bai entered his life, she cruelly left him again. He suddenly couldn't bear this huge silence and emptiness. It was enough to drive him crazy. He went to the place he had chosen, put her on the bed, and began to operate on her. The wound on her abdomen was relatively simple, but she had lost a lot of blood. When he attacked the base, he had brought surgical equipment and blood bags, so the operation was completed smoothly. When her breathing calmed down, her life was no longer in danger. Song Yunhuan realized that he was about to collapse. He had wanted to use his ability to help her heal quickly. But when he thought about how she would run away again after she healed, Song Yunhuan's twisted darkness flared up. He would rather her wound not heal than let her regain her ability to move. If he couldn't kill her, he would just lock her up and see how she would change her mind. In the middle of the night, she had a high fever. Song Yunhuan sat on the side, looking at her with dark eyes. Would she not betray him if she burned herself silly? Wei Wei Bai trembled in pain. When she stabbed her abdomen, the remaining life subsistence allowance automatically activated. But after a day of protection, the wound on her abdomen began to hurt again. In a daze, she saw Song Yunhuan looking at her. She knocked on the system. Did the favorability drop by a lot? Why did Song Yunhuan's eyes look so scary, like he wanted to chew her up and swallow her? The system said, "It's neither rising nor falling." Wei Wei Bai heaved a sigh of relief. It was better than what she had imagined. She thought that this misunderstanding would cause the favorable impression points to be reset to 0. Then she would relax and become muddle-headed again. A cold hand was suddenly placed on her forehead. Wei Wei Bai sighed comfortably and couldn't help but smile. But Song Yunhuan's body stiffened because of her dazed smile. He hesitated for a moment before taking his hand away. He wanted to completely erase her mind, turn her into a fool who could only listen to him. The normal Wei Wei Bai was too good at deceiving people. Even if her IQ wasn't as high as his, when it came to deceiving a man's feelings, it was like she was a self-taught girl. She could make people fall for her. To make it easier for you to read it next time, you can click the button at the bottom to record your reading record. Chapter 255. Just like in the base, everyone who saw her wanted to be with her. Lin Xiao, men passing by. Even if they were locked in the lab, those cold-hearted researchers would still open the back door for her, extending the experiment as long as possible, just so she could live longer. How could she make so many people make exceptions for her? Song Yunhuan suddenly saw her frown in pain, her face burning red, unspeakably pitiful. He stood up abruptly and quickly went to get the fever medicine, but before he could give it to her, Song Yunhuan threw the medicine away. He should let her suffer, not be soft-hearted. But within 3 minutes, he gave her the medicine again. Wei Wei Bai obediently took the medicine, completely unlike her usual hateful self. After taking the medicine, Wei Wei Bai seemed to feel better. She opened her eyes, but they were unfocused. She saw Song Yunhuan, but she wasn't fully conscious. When she realized who he was, her frown deepened. She said softly, "Song Yunhuan, I'm not lying to you." The storm of anger in Song Yunhuan's eyes gathered again. At this time, she still wanted to get sympathy and lie to him. She was ruthless to herself, and even more ruthless to him. Wei Wei Bai saw that he didn't believe her. She reached out and pulled on his sleeve, her voice small and pitiful. "Song Yunhuan, can you believe me?" She was almost crying. Song Yunhuan felt like his reason was collapsing. Anger made him irritable. Her pitiful begging tore at him, making him almost lose his mind. "Song Yunhuan, Before she could say it, he lowered his head and kissed her. He locked her bewitching words in his mouth, so that she couldn't deceive and seduce him like this. Wei Wei Bai wasn't fully awake, and with the pain from the wound and the dizziness from the fever, she fainted after a while. Song Yunhuan didn't immediately leave her, but maintained his posture. After a long time, his eyes left her lips. The heart in his chest that had stopped beating long ago started to protest again. He stood beside her for a long time, seeing that she couldn't really rest because of the pain and could only be repeatedly tortured. It was better to suffer more. Only then would she remember that there was a price to pay for betraying him. Even though he was thinking this rationally, He couldn't help but gently place his hand on her abdomen. His fingers warmed up because of his strength. This warmth suppressed the pain of the wound. Wei Wei Bai's brows finally relaxed. Not long after, he truly fell asleep. Song Yunhuan stood by the bed all night, helping her safely get through the dangerous period. At dawn, he finally had to admit it. He couldn't kill this woman. Song Yunhuan smiled bitterly. Admit it, he hated her, but he still liked her. He couldn't suppress it. Yes, he was a coward. Even at this point, he still liked her. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 65. Wei Wei Bai finally woke up. She asked the system when she woke up. The system told her that a week had passed. Wei Wei Bai touched her abdomen, which was tightly wrapped by bandages. With such a deep wound and the fact that she didn't hold back when she tried to salvage the situation, it was likely that she was seriously injured. She couldn't get out of bed, but that didn't stop her from observing her surroundings. The bed was luxurious and expensive, and the floor was covered with an expensive, thick velvet carpet. There was a round white sofa and a beautiful vase with fresh roses on it. Huge floor-to-ceiling windows, thick dark green curtains drawn. Compared to Song Yunhuan's house, this was so luxurious that it didn't seem like a palace that should exist in the apocalypse. Next time you open the bookshelf, you'll see it, if you like. Chapter 256. You can search Time Travel System. Prince Charming, come to search book, www.sashu.com. In Baidu to find the Wei Wei Bai's head started to hurt. Did I transmigrate again? System. No, this is the highest floor of the super-rich district. The entire floor has been opened up, with a luxurious balcony, swimming pool, indoor fitness room, entertainment area, and a small bar counter. Open the window and you can see the vast sea in the distance, a gentle breeze. Ah, facing the sea, spring blossoms. Wei Wei Bai trembled as she shouted, "Stop." Did the system take money from real estate developers? It was just advertising. The door suddenly opened and Song Yunhuan came in, pushing a dining cart. He heard the change in her breathing and knew she was awake. He saw Wei Wei Bai lying in bed. She had trouble breathing, and her wounds were healing slowly. She still couldn't get up. She lay there quietly, her eyes following his movements. Although she didn't look well in his eyes, she looked like a doll. "You haven't recovered yet. Eat something light first," Song Yunhuan said casually. He picked up the bowl and began to feed her porridge. Wei Wei Bai turned away, refusing his kindness. "Where is this?" Her eyes were full of doubt and insecurity. Song Yunhuan smiled, but his smile was cold. "Don't you like big, luxurious houses and want to live the life of a rich person? The place I picked for you is the most expensive place in the city's rich district. I can give you everything you want." The expression on Bai Weiwei's face changed. She was in disbelief and shock. Song Yunhuan still smiled. "Why are you unhappy? You're always around me, but I didn't give you a life of luxury. It's my fault. If you want anything in the future, just say the word and I'll get it for you." Wei Wei Bai's face paled. "I want to go back," Song Yunhuan said flatly. "Go back where?" "Wei Wei Bai, your home, no our home." Song Yunhuan froze in his attempt to feed her porridge. His eyes were as cold as thorns, prickling. "Do you want to go back?" "That's true. My old house is run down and unsafe. If you want to escape one day, there won't even be an alarm. If you go back there, it will be much easier for you to escape." Wei Wei Bai gritted her teeth. "Song Yunhuan, what's wrong with you? We agreed that we'd guard it together. Don't you understand how important that place is?" Song Yunhuan finally couldn't keep his calm. He threw the bowl in his hand. Wei Wei Bai was shocked by his actions. Song Yunhuan's eyes turned red again, terrifying. "Significant? To you, anything in this world could be of great importance to you. Only I, in your eyes, am probably just a fool that you can play with." Wei Wei Bai saw that he was almost driven crazy. She wanted to reach out and touch him, as if she wanted to comfort him. Song Yunhuan grabbed her hand so hard that he almost broke it. "From now on, you will live here. It has everything you've ever dreamed of, a luxurious house, beautiful clothes, and—" He laughed sinisterly. "You won't be able to escape." He had completely changed the lock on the top of the 100-story building. She couldn't open the door alone. This luxurious house was a luxurious cage. If she couldn't escape, let's see how she could hook up with others. Wei Wei Bai tried to pull her hand back. Song Yunhuan, do you want to imprison me? Song Yunhuan, I'm not thinking. I'm already imprisoning you. To make it easier for you to read it next time, you can click the button at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 257. After saying that, he no longer cared about her and made another bowl of porridge. Eat something. Bai Weiwei saw his unyielding attitude and knew that nothing could be salvaged. She was powerless, and her eyes dimmed a lot. After eating, Song Yunhuan went out again. Wei Wei Bai continued to lie there like a corpse. I'm so scared. The system was surprised. So you have times when you're scared? Wei Wei Bai. If I'm imprisoned, then I'm not far from being whipped or tied up. The system. When did you become so experienced? Wei Wei Bai. I feel like Song Yunhuan's eyes are like wolves. He's not going to eat me, is he? The system nodded. He does want to eat you. This wasn't the case. No matter what, the days went by. Wei Wei Bai's wound was gradually getting better. She started walking, but before she could take 2 steps, she fell to the ground. Song Yunhuan sat on the sofa, expressionless, reading a book. He didn't come over to help her. Bai Weiwei lay on the ground. I miss the good man in the apocalypse, Song Yunhuan, who could give me sanitary pads. The system. You made him disappear. Weiwei Bai couldn't help but cry. She had made one mistake, and even her life wasn't enough to make up for it. When Song Yunhuan heard her sobs, he couldn't calm down. He finally couldn't help but walk over, pick her up, and put her on the bed. Weiwei Bai stared at him blankly. Seeing that he was leaving, she couldn't help but reach out and hug his waist. Song Yunhuan felt her soft body press against him, and his muscles stiffened. She tried to hug him, tears coming out like she had been wronged. Song Yunhuan turned his back to her. He didn't comfort her, didn't ask, let her cry, but he didn't push her away. Song Yunhuan, let's go back, okay? She choked out. I was wrong. I don't like the luxurious house, the life of the rich, and I don't like beautiful clothes and jewelry. I want to go back. I like the old house with you. She seemed to have placed herself in the dust and had already reached the limit of her ability to compromise. Song Yunhuan felt his heart hurt again. How could she make him want to surrender with just a few words? He reached out and pried open her hand one by one. He coldly snorted. I won't give you any chance to escape. You should give up. This place was indeed very good. At least, without his permission, she couldn't even take a step out of this house. Ignoring her pleading eyes, Song Yunhuan walked out of the room and slammed the door shut. Then he stood outside the door and heard Weiwei Bai crying under the blanket. Her crying made his heart wrench. He couldn't help but curse himself in a low voice. He even felt sorry for her. Weiwei Bai's wounds gradually healed, but her face became more and more haggard. The system replied, it's just the favorability points that didn't increase. Weiwei Bai's heart was dead. No, once you lose Song Yunhuan's trust, it'll be hard to increase his favorability. This was also why it was so difficult for his favorability to increase in the early stages. However, in the later stages, as the favorability level increased, the trust level also increased. This was the reason why the favorability level increased crazily. But now, he didn't trust her. No matter what she did, the favorability level wouldn't increase. Seeing that there was only half a month left, she could already foresee her tragic ending. The system calmly commented, you can do whatever you want. Weiwei Bai, Song Yunhuan went out to buy some groceries. When he came back, he heard sounds from the kitchen. He walked to the kitchen door and saw Weiwei Bai baking something with flour all over her face. You're back. She smiled at him like nothing had happened. Next time you open the bookshelf, you'll see it, if you like. Chapter 258. Song Yunhuan held the food and looked at her calmly. Weiwei Bai heard the sound of the oven and hurriedly opened it. Without thinking, she reached for her work. But before she could reach out, Song Yunhuan grabbed her waist with one hand and pulled her into his embrace. With his other hand, He nonchalantly took out a steaming lump of an unknown object. Wei Wei Bai realized that she had forgotten to wear gloves. If Song Yunhuan hadn't stopped her, her hands would have been cooked. Song Yunhuan asked, "What is this?" Wei Wei Bai smiled. "Birthday cake. Today is your birthday." Song Yunhuan's eyes went cold. He looked at the black, twisted cake in his hands. Did Wei Wei Bai want to poison him and then run away? He angrily shoved the cake into her hands. "I can't eat human food anymore." Then he realized that he had said the wrong thing. This unknown object that Wei Wei Bai was baking wasn't for human consumption. Bai Weiwei held the cake and stood in place, somewhat sad. Song Yunhuan put down the thing in his hands and walked out. Weiwei Bai looked at the result of her hard work. "System, this is my first time cooking." The system couldn't bear to look at her. "Is this cooking? You're making a biological weapon." Weiwei Bai looked at it. Even if it was a pile of shit, she would still find it cute. "You guys don't know how to appreciate it. It's a bit ugly, but it's good that it's inside." "System, it's already burnt to charcoal. What's inside?" "You can't compress charcoal into diamonds, right?" Weiwei Bai looked at the cake in her hands, put it on the table, and began to put candles on it. Song Yunhuan saw her sitting alone outside the kitchen. Her slender figure looked lonely. Today was his birthday. She actually remembered, and she made a cake for him. Was she trying to numb him, then run away? Song Yunhuan knew what she was up to. Get on his good side, gain his trust, make him take her out to play, then run away. So don't be silly. He clearly knew what she was up to, but his feet couldn't help but move forward. She was lying to him. He came behind her and watched as her fingers trembled as she lit the candle. He couldn't help but reach out and hug her from behind. She was a little stunned and didn't seem to be able to react. He clearly knew that she was lying to him, but why did he still feel happy and sad at the same time? Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 70. He admitted defeat. Even if she wanted to run away, he couldn't control himself from liking her. Bai Weiwei sensed that his face was buried in the hollow of her shoulder, and he seemed to be somewhat agitated as he panted in a low voice. "Song Yunhuan?" She called softly. Song Yunhuan was silent for a while before letting her go. "I won't believe you even if you do that," he said coldly. Weiwei Bai was stunned for a moment before she smiled indifferently. "I got it." How could she still laugh when his words were so hurtful? Weiwei Bai looked at the cake. "Song Yunhuan, did you blow out the candles?" Song Yunhuan reached out and gently waved his hand, and the candles went out. "I'm not human anymore. There's no point in celebrating my birthday." Weiwei Bai couldn't maintain her smile. She seemed sad and sad. "I forgot. After you become a zombie, will you always live? Won't you die?" For people who couldn't die, birthdays didn't have much meaning. Song Yunhuan said coldly, "I don't know if I'll never die, but compared to a human body, this body can last for a long time. Maybe twice, 10 times, or 100 times. // to make it easier for you to read next time, you can click at the bottom to record this reading. Next time you open the bookshelf, you'll see it, if you like. Chapter 259. Weiwei Bai's eyes watered. "But I'm human." Song Yunhuan didn't know how to react, but soon, his chest trembled. Weiwei Bai said, "I'll grow old. I'll die. I don't have that much time to wait for you." Song Yunhuan had always wanted to become human, so he didn't think too much about it. If he had always been a zombie, then when she died, he might have been able to keep his young appearance and continue to live. Just imagining it was scary. Weiwei Bai smiled bitterly. "So I want you to become human more than anyone else." "No, I want all zombies to become human, so the world can return to normal." Song Yunhuan laughed. "I didn't know you had such a grand idea." Bai Weiwei ignored his ridicule and said in an agitated tone, "I'm not great at all. I hope that after we return to normal, we can date on campus like an ordinary couple. We can walk in the crowd, go to the lively amusement park, sit on the Ferris wheel, and eat cotton candy together." Her voice dropped. "I want you to be human more than anyone else, really?" "Weiwei Bai," he said suddenly. Weiwei Bai looked up, confused. "Even if you pretend to be pitiful, I won't believe you. It's good that I'm not human, because the power of zombies makes me think about your abilities." If the world returns to normal and I become a normal human, you won't be mine anymore. Song Yun-hwan sneered, his eyes full of sarcasm. Before, I was just a lonely, introverted, poor ghost with no money. If it wasn't for the bet, you wouldn't have approached me. Now that the apocalypse is here, you can't live on your own. You can only be at my mercy. Wei Bai looked up, startled, a little scared. Song Yun-hwan was very self-aware. I'm very dark, aren't I? And very despicable. Unfortunately, you can only be with a monster like me. Wei Bai didn't know what to do. But you can't lock me up forever. Song Yun-hwan, I can. Wei Bai tried her best to convince him. But I can't be with you forever. A human's lifespan isn't long, Song Yun-hwan said firmly. I won't let you die. Even if I turn you into a monster like me, I won't let you die. Wei Bai couldn't take it anymore. Song Yun-hwan, you're crazy. Song Yun-hwan laughed at himself. Now you know. Even if he did go crazy, she was the one who drove him crazy. Wei Bai angrily grabbed his collar. Song Yun-hwan, would it kill you to trust me? Song Yun-hwan said coldly, you will die. Wei Bai was stunned. Song Yun-hwan's eyes darkened. Believing in her meant being manipulated by her. He loved her so much that he lost his mind. Falling in love with a woman who didn't like him and was always thinking about running away would kill him. He would wish he was dead. Wei Bai rubbed her eyes. Her eyes were bloodshot. What do I have to do to make you believe me? Song Yun-hwan's eyes darkened. He walked away for a while, then came back with a small box. He opened it in front of Wei Bai. In the middle of the box, there was a small bottle. The bottle contained a light blue liquid that looked quite tasty. Do you know what this is? Song Yun-hwan asked. Wei Bai frowned and didn't say anything. This is a semi-finished vaccine that I got when I want to pick you up. It's a vaccine that has been fused with your blood. But this vaccine can't turn me into a human yet. Crossover system. Adonis, come here. /crossover system. Adonis, come here. / crossover system. Adonis, come here. Download crossover system. Adonis, come here. Mobile the crossover system. Adonis, come here. Chapter 260. Wei Bai shuddered. She didn't know what he was going to say, but his malice was obvious. Song Yun-hwan said, word by word, do you know what the last step is? That is, if you drink this liquid, you won't be able to digest it. Instead, it will start to absorb the nutrients in your flesh and blood. In the end, you will become its vessel. When it matures, it will consume you and turn you into ashes. His words were cold and filled with malicious intent. It was terrifying. Wei Bai's face paled. Really? Song Yun-hwan paused, revealing a cold smile. Really? Once you drink it, it can't be reversed. You'll die. No, that's not what I meant. Wei Bai looked at the small bottle, a little scared, but more serious. Can it really turn you into a human? There was a trace of expectation in her eyes. Song Yun-hwan's fingers dug into his palms. He clenched his fists, reminding himself that this woman could not be trusted. It's true. If you die, I'll become a human. Wei Bai was silent. Her face flashed with struggle and fear. In the end, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She quickly picked up the small bottle, opened the lid, and didn't drink it. The thing was already in Song Yun-hwan's hands. Wei Bai looked at him. Didn't you want me to drink it? Song Yun-hwan put the thing back into the box without a word, closed it, and took it away. Wei Bai immediately chased after him. Song Yun-hwan, put it down. Song Yun-hwan, if you take it away, how will you become a human? I knew you cared about me. Boom. Song Yun-hwan turned and punched the wall behind Wei Bai. A huge crack immediately appeared in the wall. It was terrifying. Song Yun-hwan said gloomily, don't push your luck. Don't try to win my sympathy. I won't believe you. With that, he walked away with the suitcase. And Wei Bai was so scared that she stood by the broken wall. She suddenly yelled at Song Yun-hwan, you're worried about me. Why else would you leave so quickly? If you have the guts, leave the thing in your hand. I'll drink it for you. Song Yun-hwan seemed to stumble. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 75. When Wei Wei Bai heard the notification, she wiped the cold sweat off her face. The system said, "Didn't you say that favorability won't increase if you don't trust me?" Wei Wei Bai, sigh, "I'm just trying my best to gain his trust." Of course, the reason why he gave me 5 points of favorability was because I made a cake for him. Also, I'm not afraid of death because I wanted to drink that thing. If he finds out, my heart will ache for him. System. Feeling heartache will increase your favorability. Forget about the cake. I'll be thankful as long as it doesn't lose any points. At night, there was a thunderstorm. Thunder rumbled. The lightning of doomsday was especially thick and varied in color. Wei Wei Bai stood alone in front of Song Yunhuan's door, hugging a pillow and wearing a nightgown. She knocked on the door. "Get out." Song Yunhuan's cold voice came out. Wei Wei Bai, she wanted to protest. Other people's imprisonment was a one-stop service. Why was her imprisonment so clear that she couldn't even see meat? Song Yunhuan was sleeping in a different room from her, and he didn't even allow her to sleep in his bed. Such a pure heart was intolerable. Wei Wei Bai squeezed her eyes, trying to squeeze out a few tears of fear. "It's thunder. I'm scared." Song Yunhuan, "It won't hit you. What are you scared of?" Download the at https://m sashu. Com the button at the bottom to record your reading record. Next time you open the bookshelf, you'll see it, if you like. Chapter 261. Wei Wei Bai, what if it hits you? Song Yunhuan, Wei Wei Bai, am I not a bad woman in your eyes? I'm the kind of person that lightning strikes. There was silence on the other side of the door. Suddenly, the door opened. Wei Wei Bai, who was leaning against the door, rolled in. She lay on the ground and looked up to see Song Yunhuan looking at her gloomily. There seemed to be a fire in his eyes. In the darkness, he looked strange and crazy. Wei Wei Bai immediately stood up and pulled at her robe. She said nervously, "It's almost 12. Your birthday is almost over." Song Yunhuan didn't answer. Wei Wei Bai said uncomfortably, "I haven't given you a present yet." She stood up and slowly took off her robe. Song Yunhuan's pupils shrank. He was so nervous that he forgot to breathe. Was she going to give him to him? She wasn't wearing anything under the robe. "I'm going to destroy you for the moon." Wei Wei Bai suddenly threw her robe aside. She was wearing the moon rabbit costume, holding the moon stick, and yelling at Song Yunhuan with a serious face. Song Yunhuan, system, MDZZ. Wei Wei Bai felt embarrassed. She held the moon stick tightly in her hands. I know you like this character, so I wanted to imitate it as a birthday present for you. If it doesn't look good, don't laugh." Uffed. Song Yunhuan couldn't help it. These days, people who were stupid enough to do this were extinct. He was so angry at her that he was about to explode. Reason also reminded him that she had run away before. She had to have a motive for pleasing him, but seeing her so serious about doing something stupid, just for him, no matter what the motive was, Song Yunhuan was very sure that he was happy. Ding. The male lead's favorability has increased to 80. This could also increase favorability. System, 2 idiots. Wei Wei Bai was worried. Song Yunhuan, I told you not to laugh. Do you know how much courage it took me to dress up like this? She was so anxious that her face turned red. Suddenly, she was pulled into Song Yunhuan's arms. He quietly buried his face in her shoulder. His breathing was a little cold. You really have the ability to drive people crazy. Wei Wei Bai froze, not daring to move. Song Yunhuan's kisses landed on her neck, slowly moving down to her shoulder. His breath was a mess. He kissed her collarbone and couldn't help but take a small bite. She trembled slightly, and her skin turned red. Outside, there was a thunderstorm and a pink and ambiguous atmosphere in the room. Just as Song Yunhuan was about to unbutton her bra, the moon stick hit him on the head with a bang. He was stunned. Wei Wei Bai took the opportunity to run away. Her face was red, and her eyes were watery. She looked at him while panting. You. Do you want to do me, or Shui Bingyue? Song Yunhuan couldn't catch his breath. He almost suffocated. I'm not a pervert. Why would I do an anime character? Wei Wei Bai let out a sigh of relief. Then turn around. I'll change before we continue. Song Yunhuan's face flashed with confusion. Wei Wei Bai said angrily, "You like anime characters so much. I'm wearing these clothes. Who knows who you're interested in?" Song Yunhuan. So stupid, yet so reasonable. He silently turned around. It was rare for feelings to warm up, and he couldn't bear to break this warm moment. Then he heard the sound of her tidying up her clothes, and his expression suddenly changed. He was about to rush over when he saw the familiar bottle in Wei Wei Bai's hand. He put the small box on the table. Because it was within his sight, and because he didn't think Wei Wei Bai would touch it, he didn't hide it. Wei Wei Bai stepped on the window. The window was open, and below was a 100-story building. The wind whistled past. She swayed, making his teeth chatter. Seeing that Song Yunhuan had stopped, not daring to come over, Wei Wei Bai smiled. She raised her head and drank the blue liquid in the bottle. Then she smiled brightly and said, "Song Yunhuan, happy birthday. This is my birthday gift to you. I hope you can become human, not a monster. Next time you open the bookshelf, you'll see it, if you like." Chapter 262. As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly couldn't control her body and fell down. Behind her was a 100-story building. If she fell down, she would be smashed to pieces. Song Yunhuan quickly came to her side. He reached out and pulled her out of the window. Then he held her tightly in his arms and opened her mouth. He shouted wildly, "Spit it out!" Bai Wei Wei trembled all over, not from pain, but from a strange, numbing itch. The itch went deep into her bones, as if something was tearing at her limbs, internal organs, muscles, and blood vessels bit by bit. Because it was so slow, she didn't feel any pain. Song Yunhuan knew it was too late. She couldn't spit it out after drinking it. He immediately ran to get the suppressant and injected her with 3 or 4 needles, slowing down the rate at which the vaccine was consuming her life force. Compared to Song Yunhuan's frantic madness, Wei Wei Bai was very calm. Her eyes were clear, her face pale, and her expression indifferent. "Song Yunhuan, do you believe me?" There was no pleading or sadness in this sentence. It was a simple sentence, but it carried more weight than any of the previous words. Song Yunhuan was injecting the last suppressant into her body when he heard her words. His fingers trembled. He looked up in despair. There were no tears in his eyes, but it felt like he was crying. She tugged at his sleeve. "Do you believe me? I'm not running away. I just want to get the vaccine so you can become an adult." Song Yunhuan's heart twisted into a ball. "I'll save you." Ding. The male lead's favorability has increased to 85. Song Yunhuan immediately picked her up and rushed out of the room. He opened the door to the lab and put her on the bed. Then he began to check the rate of erosion. There had to be a lot of suppressants. Before they could force the thing out of her body, they had to suppress the erosion. The suppressants still had some effect, but Song Yunhuan knew that it wouldn't last long. 1 week, 4 days. No, maybe not even 3 days. Song Yunhuan's mind was blank. Wei Wei Bai still said softly, "You haven't said if you believe me." She still had the temper of a little girl. She was very much like a child who wanted someone to carry her just because she broke her skin a little. Song Yunhuan could barely speak. He was scared out of his mind, on the verge of collapse. The air pressure increased sharply, and some of the fragile equipment in the laboratory began to break. This was the result of him being unable to suppress his power. His voice was broken. "I believe you. I believe whatever you say." Ding. The male lead's favorability is at 90. Wei Wei Bai smiled, relieved and relaxed. She looked at the light above her head, her expression dazed. "Song Yunhuan, it hurts." Song Yunhuan immediately ran to find painkillers. He was no longer the confident researcher who could deal with all kinds of unexpected situations. He was just a fool, a lunatic, who was facing the imminent death of his loved one. He fed Wei Wei Bai the medicine. "I'll save you. I'll save you." He was so anxious that he could only say this sentence. Wei Wei Bai's voice softened. "I think I can't see." Corrode the 5 senses and deprive them of life force. That was the scary thing about the vaccine he made. He could only delay the time she would lose her life. However, the damage done was irreversible. Song Yunhuan rushed to her side, reaching out to touch her face. "Can't see? Can you see me?" Wei Wei Bai tried her best to squint her eyes. After a while, she said dejectedly, "You look handsome no matter how I look at you. How can there be such a good-looking man in this world?" Song Yunhuan / crossover system. Adonis. Come here and read the full article at https://www.sashu.com. Download fast transmigration system. Adonis. Come here fast transmigration system. Adonis. Come here. Chapter 263. The inhibitor made Wei Wei Bai completely lose her sense of pain, but the damage caused by the vaccine couldn't be reversed. 2 or 3 days after taking that damn vaccine, she lost all feeling below the waist. She was highly myopic and slowly losing her sight. Her ears started to hurt. Even her sense of taste was numb. Wei Wei Bai said, "Slagstem, I feel like I'm 70 or 80 years old. Are my teeth going to fall out in a few minutes?" The system was expressionless. "Oh, you're insulting a woman in her 70s and 80s. She can still dance in the Guang dance, but can you?" Wei Wei Bai, what's the use of this system other than pissing me off? After Wei Wei Bai sighed, she sensed someone approaching. It was Song Yunhuan. She tried to squint her eyes. Although she was highly myopic, she could still see his short black hair and pale face. Wei Wei. He excitedly carried her to the wheelchair. Wei Wei Bai felt like he wasn't normal. Had he thought it through? Instead of letting the vaccine digest her, he might as well take her to the kitchen while she was still fresh, chop her up and cook her into a pot of braised pork. She was put on the bed in the lab. Then she heard a woman scream. Fuck, she wasn't dead yet, and this damn zombie was bringing a woman home, and he was cheating in front of her. Song Yunhuan started to disinfect his hands, like he was going to do surgery. Wei Wei Bai was still looking around. She clearly heard a woman scream. Then she finally saw a row of cages not far away. Inside the cage were a dozen or so young women. It was a big scene. She needed time to calm down. "What do you want?" After Wei Wei Bai calmed down, she felt like she should ask the person involved. Song Yunhuan was already putting on gloves and a mask. He looked down at her, the shadow under his bangs making his eyes look even more sinister. "I want you to live." He took out a set of scalpels and looked at the women. "These people are a perfect match for you. Your internal organs are starting to die. I'll help you change them first." Wei Wei Bai and the system were shocked. If he wanted to change his internal organs, then he should do it properly. What was going on with a living person? How heartless. Song Yunhuan walked towards the women, his voice calm. "The organs preserved in the hospital have all rotted away because of the loss of electricity. The organs that can be used are from living people." Song Yunhuan, "I don't want surgery." Only then did Wei Wei Bai react. She screamed in horror. Song Yunhuan was indifferent. "I just want to prolong your life and use this time to figure out how to get the vaccine out of your body. You will be punished by the heavens." Song Yunhuan gently advised, "To get back at me, you impulsively push me into the zombie crowd, so don't feel guilty, because you have the potential to be a bad person. As for me, as long as you don't die, it doesn't matter how bad you are, how willful you are, or how unreasonable you are. As long as you live, and live happily." Bai Wei Wei listened to his words, and her scalp went numb with fear. She struggled to get up. "Song Yunhuan, stop." Song Yunhuan opened the cage, grabbed one of the women, and easily anesthetized her. Then he closed the cage and carried the woman to another operating table. "It's too late. I'm already crazy." His eyes were cold, his voice calm. // to make it easier for you to read next time, you can click at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 264. After he finished speaking, he picked up the scalpel. Just as he was about to dissect and take out the internal organs, he heard a loud crash. He quickly turned his head and saw Wei Wei Bai, who could no longer walk, fall off the operating table. She desperately reached for something sharp. Song Yunhuan was so fast that he left afterimages in the air. In a flash, he was by her side. He reached out to pick her up, but she slapped his hand away. Song Yunhuan couldn't react. He looked at his hand. There was a deep scar on the back of his hand. Wei Wei Bai held the scalpel in her hand. She looked at him like he was a stranger. Her eyes were terrifyingly cold. You're not Song Yunhuan. Her every word was like the knife in her hand, gouging out his heart. Song Yunhuan's hand was still in the air. He didn't know whether to hug her or not. His expression was blank, as if he didn't know what expression to make. Wei Wei Bai held the knife and leaned against the bed. Her fingers were shaking. You're just a monster. The Song Yunhuan I know isn't like you. Even if he's a loner, he won't hurt people. He's smart, but he never shows off. He doesn't like to make friends, but when it comes to helping people, he'll take care of it. He'll feed wildcats, donate money, and his favorite anime characters are all righteous and kind. Wei Wei Bai finally choked on her sobs. She couldn't hold back her tears. He's not like you. Song Yunhuan was still in that position. He was bent over, his hand outstretched, as if he was thirsting for something, but didn't dare approach. She hated him. He never thought that one day he would see this kind of hatred in Wei Wei Bai's eyes. And it was because of him. Wei Wei Bai muttered to herself, the Song Yunhuan I like isn't like you. I worked so hard to turn you into a human because I like you as a human. Song Yunhuan felt his heart hurt. Clearly, it shouldn't have hurt. His heartbeat had stopped a long time ago. How could it hurt to this extent? Bai Wei Wei looked at him mockingly. And now you're as ferocious as the devil. You've been corroded by the zombie virus, and all the beauty that belongs to human beings are gone. You're no longer the man I secretly envied and admired. Song Yunhuan tried to open his mouth a few times before he finally whispered, Don't say it. Wei Wei Bai said, You killed people. You ate people. You're not human. Song Yunhuan's eyes were sad. He wanted to explain, but he didn't know how. Actually, he only killed those who wanted to kill him. He ate humans. He didn't eat humans. He controlled his appetite and only drank blood. He was no, Wei Wei Bai was right. He was indeed a monster. Faced with the fact that she was going to die, he realized that even if he was a monster, even if he abandoned all of his morals as a human, all of his kindness and brilliance did not matter. She was about to die. So why was he still insisting on being beautiful? The world was already in a mess, and he would never encounter anything beautiful again. The only beauty he had left was Wei Wei Bai. Ding. The male lead's favorability is at 93. Song Yunhuan no longer hesitated. He took the knife from her, carried her to the operating table, and tied her up. Then he patted her head and said helplessly, Don't mess around with me. Wei Wei, you'll be fine soon. Wei Wei Bai finally couldn't take it anymore. Song Yunhuan, come back. Song Yunhuan ignored her and turned to the operating table, where she couldn't see him. He finally looked like he was about to collapse. Deep sadness appeared on his face. He looked like he was crying, but no tears came out. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. The is at https://m.sashu.com. Next time you open the bookshelf, you'll see it, if you like. Chapter 265. Wei Wei Bai watched as he walked step by step to the operating table. Song Yunhuan. She screamed heartbreakingly, pitifully. The system couldn't help but wipe her tears. Host, don't shout. I'm going to cry myself to death. Wei Wei Bai, I'm the one who's going to cry. Song Yunhuan, that idiot, is doing the surgery right next to me. The white flesh is cut open, the blood is pouring out, and then the bright red organs are being pulled out. I don't want to see that, but at least close the curtain. The system gritted its teeth. Wait, that's why you don't want to do the surgery? What happened to keeping the male lead kind, not wanting him to turn into a demon? What happened to the heart-wrenching love between you and me? Wei Wei Bai, of course there are other reasons. I'm about to die, but he won't let me die peacefully. He wants to do the surgery. Do you think it's easy for me? System. Maybe you should thank him for prolonging your life. Your favorability isn't full yet. Wei Wei Bai, I sacrificed myself heroically. His favorability will definitely be full. You have to believe in my experience. System. Haha, screw your experience in deceiving feelings. I'll never believe in love again. The system suddenly said, Host, he's closing the curtain. Song Yunhuan seemed to have just realized that the surgery required absolute silence. He closed the curtain, blocking out Wei Wei Bai's voice. His eyes were red. Despair and madness intertwined into a deep feeling, roaring in his body. His fingers were steady as he picked up the scalpel. Oh, he cut open the skin. That white and tender skin. With a whoosh, he cut it open. That bloody flesh, it's still rosy when it's turned over. Hee. Look at the organs. That heart wrapped around the blood vessels, thumping. So hot that it's about to jump out of the body with the blood. Wei Wei Bai's face turned pale. This vivid description was no different from seeing it with her own eyes. Stop talking, Master Tong. The system scoffed and continued. Oh, that liver, lungs, kidneys, they're all wriggling. Maybe it's because they haven't smelled such fresh air, that's why they're so active. Wei Wei Bai, trash system, you're ruining my appetite and destroying my happiness. System. Trash host, you destroyed my feelings and extinguished my youth. Wei Wei Bai and the system. Your grandpa really wants to change the system, host. Just when Wei Wei Bai thought that Song Yunhuan was going to perform a full operation on her, a loud rumbling sound came from downstairs. What followed was a series of loud noises. The building shook violently. Wei Wei Bai felt that even the bed she was sleeping on was shaking. The glass windows began to crack, the circuits exploded, and the lights flickered. The curtain was pulled open. Song Yunhuan, his hands stained with blood, rushed to Wei Wei Bai and picked her up. His face was ferocious. He gritted his teeth and said, "Damn humans." Suddenly, a helicopter appeared outside the window, and a submachine gun started shooting. The bullets pierced through all the obstacles, heading straight for Wei Wei Bai. Song Yunhuan waved his hand. Space twisted violently, and the bullets flew in all directions. He grabbed a chair and threw it out the window. The chair whistled like a meteorite and crashed into the helicopter. Helicopter. Dead. Wei Wei Bai, hitting a helicopter with your bare hands, is this still the law of nature? Before she could think, Song Yunhuan kicked open the door and rushed out. He was faster than a helicopter. It took him less than a few minutes to go from the 100-floor stairs to the ground floor. Wei Wei Bai was dizzy. The floors below were blown up, and flames were burning wildly. Song Yunhuan wasn't afraid of the flames at all. He could use the inhuman ability of twisting space easily. Let's go to the nearest abandoned hospital. There's surgery equipment there. I can save you. // to make it easier for you to read next time, you can click at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 266. When Song Yunhuan said this, his muscles were incredibly tense. The sudden attack of the humans had destroyed his collection of human organs and suppressants. Wei Wei Bai couldn't live without the suppressants. Her organs were already starting to have problems. In less than an hour, her lungs would be damaged. He could only watch her suffocate to death. And the infection of the vaccine wouldn't slow down. It would continue to eat away at her heart, her brain, her everything. Without the suppressants, she would turn into ashes in less than 2 hours. This was already the most optimistic estimate. He didn't have time to waste. He couldn't even think about revenge or counterattack. A large army appeared below the building. This mighty attack seemed to have mobilized all the elites of the human race. And the zombies that Song Yunhuan had summoned were also attacking the humans. The scene was bloody and abnormally intense. It was like hell on earth. Song Yunhuan rushed out of the battlefield. His only goal was the hospital. He had to find the suppressants before her lungs were corroded. The hospital had a large amount of good medicine for him to make. Suddenly, a bomb exploded next to them. Song Yunhuan was in a hurry. He didn't notice and didn't use his power in the first moment of the explosion. Wei Wei Bai only felt the violent waves of power rushing towards her. She thought she was dead. But the next moment, the terrible power of the explosion disappeared. She opened her eyes in a daze. Half of Song Yunhuan's body had been damaged by the explosion. His skin was black and rotting. One side of his face was still handsome, but the other was cracked. He looked like a demon. He was afraid that she would be hurt, so he didn't even use his power. He directly blocked all the aftermath of the explosion. Suddenly, Song Yunhuan's eyes trembled. He lowered his head and licked Wei Wei Bai's face. Her face had been scratched by a small piece of the explosion. The wound wasn't deep, just a shallow scar. He licked it a few times. Her face was smooth and delicate again, without a trace of a wound. Wei Wei Bai's eyes were a little slow. She tried to look, and finally saw his face. She weakly reached out to touch his face, and suddenly whispered, "Song Yunhuan, let's go on the Ferris wheel, okay?" Her beautiful face was abnormally pale, and even her lips were a tragic shade of white. In contrast, her black eyes were clear and translucent, like a cluster of delicate flowers that had finally bloomed and lost all color, leaving behind only the petals. Song Yunhuan's footsteps slowed, but he still wouldn't let go. "I'll find a way to save you soon. When you're better, I'll take you to the amusement park. You can live there for the rest of your life." Wei Wei Bai's eyes dimmed. "I can't wait any longer." Song Yunhuan choked out, "No, hold on a little longer, just a little longer." Wei Wei Bai smiled. "I can't bear hardships. I'm afraid of pain, cold, not having enough to eat, and not having anyone to accompany me. I'm even more afraid that no one will remember me after I die." Song Yunhuan rushed forward. "You won't die. I won't let you feel pain or cold. I'll stay with you. I'll do whatever you want." Ding. The male lead's favorability has increased to 95. Wei Wei Bai's fingers finally lost strength. Her voice broke. "I can't see you." Song Yunhuan's body suddenly froze. He trembled uncontrollably. She still whispered, "I want to touch you, but I can't raise my hand." Song Yunhuan saw that her wrist had turned blue and brittle. Gradually, the skin began to die, turning into fragments that drifted away. Her fingers were digested. Once the limbs began to be digested, there was no saving them. "You said you'd listen to me. Then come with me to the Ferris wheel. We won't be gone for long. I'll sit for a while before I do the surgery." Song Yunhuan stood there in a daze. He struggled to open his mouth several times before finally spitting out a word. "Okay." Ding. The male lead's favorability has increased to 97. Download the https://www.sashu.com/download the full article. https://www.sashu.com download the full article. https://www.sashu.com download the full article. https://m.sashu.com// The next time you open the bookshelf, you'll see it, if you like. Chapter 267. The amusement park restarted. The Ferris wheel slowly spun. Song Yunhuan sat inside with Wei Wei Bai in his arms. "Song Yunhuan, is the sky beautiful?" The sky outside was dark, without any color. Song Yunhuan held her, feeling her body begin to deteriorate. Beautiful, very blue, and heart-shaped clouds. Wei Wei Bai showed a sweet smile. It wasn't the smile from training, but from the heart. She said, "You know, I've wanted to sit on the Ferris wheel with the person I like since I was a child." Song Yunhuan looked at her blankly. He wanted to reach out and touch her face, her lips, but he didn't dare. He was afraid it would break. He forced a smile. "Did you get what you wanted?" Wei Wei Bai leaned against his chest, her voice light. "You're so shameless, always making me confess first." Song Yunhuan hurriedly said, "I like you, no." He paused, then solemnly said, "I love you." Ding. The male lead's favorability has increased to 98. Wei Wei Bai laughed, her laughter bright and happy. "Even you have a day like this, Song Yunhuan. I thought you were a blockhead, incapable of love." Song Yunhuan couldn't even fake a smile, the despair in his eyes overflowing. Her feet also began to dissipate. Wei Wei Bai suddenly said, "Song Yunhuan, will you love me forever?" Song Yunhuan, "Forever is too short. I love you forever." Wei Wei Bai smiled until her eyes narrowed. "Then let's make a pinky promise. We'll be together forever." Song Yunhuan looked at her disappearing hand, his voice trembling. "Okay, make a pinky promise." He reached out and pretended to touch her missing finger. "Song Yunhuan, I love you too," she said gently. His fingers hooked in the air. When he heard her soft confession, His heart was heavily struck. Ding. The male lead's favorability has increased to 100. So, you have to live forever and remember me, okay? Her words gradually disappeared along with the collapse of her body. Blue, endless blue, appeared on her body. Song Yunhuan's brain had stopped working long ago. His eyes were red, and there was only blue floating in the air. No, he screamed in agony. He reached out his hands to stop the blue fragments, but it was too late. Just as his fingers touched her face, which still had a gentle smile on it, it shattered and turned into blue specks of light, scattering like butterflies. He wanted to hug her body, but her body also turned into blue ashes. He hugged her fiercely, but he only hugged the blue powder and the void. There was nothing left. Wei Wei Bai was gone. Song Yunhuan blankly held his hands full of blue ash. More ash fell under the Ferris wheel, and in the ash was a mature vaccine. A semi-condensed blue water droplet. Song Yunhuan suddenly grabbed the ashes and stuffed them into his mouth. These belonged to Wei Wei. These belonged to Wei Wei. She was his. She could only be his. Song Yunhuan was desperate. He stuffed the last of the ashes into his mouth, leaving only the vaccine. Ha ha ha, ha ha ha. I'll remember you as long as I live. Forever? Wei Wei Bai, how could you be so ruthless? A zombie's life was as long as eternity. It was a hellish road with no end in sight. Song Yunhuan suddenly picked up the vaccine. Humans were better. Humans could die at any time. Some people only lived for a few years. He stuffed the water droplet into his mouth and felt the pain of his flesh and blood regenerating. I'm a human now. Wei Wei, are you happy? Tears flowed from his eyes. Crossover system. Adonis, come here. /crossover system. Adonis, come here. / crossover system. Adonis, come here. Download crossover system. Adonis, come here. Mobile the crossover system. Adonis, come here. QQ, blog, WeChat, etc. Chapter 268. Ding. Successful. You have received 1 love point and wish to extend your lifespan by 1 month. After deducting 10 days of life support and 5 days of eye drops, you have 15 days left. Wei Wei Bai woke up with a splitting headache and heard the system's voice. This time, it didn't cause any trouble and simply extended her lifespan by 15 days. She was a little touched and wanted to cry. Damn it. What the hell were eye drops? When did she buy eye drops? This stupid system would die a horrible death if it didn't steal her life points. She cursed as she opened her eyes. It was dark outside, and there was a thunderstorm outside. It was another thunderstorm. Why did she always wake up in this kind of weather? Oh right, where was that B*TCH by Yao Yao? She was shocked and recalled that before she was pulled into the game, Bai Yao Yao had tied a bomb to her father. Although it was deactivated, she didn't see what happened afterward. The system said considerately, your father is fine, but your scumbag sister is lying in the intensive care unit. That ungrateful bodyguard of yours, whose conscience was eaten by dogs, just escaped. That's it. Wei Wei Bai heaved a sigh of relief. Thinking that she had 15 days to live, she felt that life was too beautiful. When did her expectations in life become so low? She didn't even want to pursue the matter of eye drops. She felt that she was too pitiful. Wei Wei Bai looked around. She was in a hospital, and she was in a luxurious VIP ward. She got off the bed and walked a few steps. She walked back silently and saw a person lying on the sofa, asleep. The light in the ward was a little dim. The man lying on the sofa had a slender figure, and both his legs were propped on the sofa's armrest. His face was turned to one side, and the light cut a cold beauty on his face. Wasn't this her cheap fiancé, Yushuan? Wei Wei Bai had almost forgotten that she had such a fiancé. She thought about how she saw Bai Yao Yao throw herself into his arms before she died. The little good impression she had of him because of his looks was all gone. Wei Wei Bai pretended that she didn't see Yushuan. She was just marrying him for business, and she was considered to be climbing up the social ladder. In the past, she still had some thoughts of bringing her family to a higher level. Now that she had experienced so many life and death situations, she felt that people should live happily and freely. The most important thing, of course, was to live for a long time. So, why don't I just call off the engagement with Yi Yuxuan? Bai Weiwei thought about it seriously for a moment, and her feet unconsciously walked out. She reached out and opened the door. Just as she was thinking about how many difficulties her family would face after she got rid of Yi Yuxuan, she suddenly saw a shadow cast on the ground by the light outside the door. One short and one tall, one in front and one behind. Who was the person standing behind her? Weiwei Bai turned around and saw that Yi Yuxuan's hair was a little messy, and his dark eyes were staring at her with a terrifying gaze. He silently stood behind her like a wolf on the hunt. In the middle of the night, it was exceptionally frightening. Weiwei Bai was so scared that she almost couldn't breathe. She furrowed her brows. Yi Yuxuan, you. She could scare someone to death by standing silently behind them. That sentence wasn't complete yet. Yi Yuxuan suddenly widened his eyes, and there was a deep and crazy emotion in his eyes. Her voice seemed to break the barrier between dream and reality, and immediately pulled Yi Yuxuan into the dream just now. After she died in the dream, that man began to destroy the world. Sequel to The Zombie King's Crazy Girlfriend: Doctor. The vaccine has been fully distributed. From today onwards, we humans will win a complete victory. We are no longer afraid of the zombie virus. /button. Chapter 269. The assistants cheered. The man who was respectfully addressed as the doctor stood by the window. The sunlight shone on his shoulders, creating a layer of holy light. He turned back and smiled gently. Yes, I've been waiting for this day for a long time. When the assistant walked over, he suddenly took the vaccine from his hand. Right, I'll get a shot first. The assistant immediately said, Yes, doctor. After countless successful cases, the vaccine had been confirmed as a safe and qualified product. So the assistant was very familiar with the vaccine. The doctor was the most important person in the lab. 3 years ago, the doctor started to develop a vaccine against the zombie virus. It was said that 3 years ago, there was a base that developed a semi-finished product. But later, because the base wanted to retaliate against the zombie wave, they gathered all their forces to attack the Zombie King. In the end, they were all wiped out by the Zombie King. Of course, after that battle, the Zombie King disappeared completely. Many people thought that the Zombie King was definitely dead. Doctor, it's done. The doctor looked up, a gentle smile on his handsome face. It was Song Yunhuan. He nodded. Remember to get vaccinated. After all, the zombie virus is very strong. If you're not careful, you'll turn into a zombie. The assistants immediately nodded. Who didn't know that Dr. Song was smart, kind, and beautiful? For the sake of humanity, he spent almost all his time in the lab these past 3 years. What was even more amazing was that he was so good that all the women outside wanted to throw themselves at him, but he kept his chastity and didn't get close to women. He was perfect without a single flaw. After Song Yunhuan returned to his old house, he opened the door to a room full of anime dresses. He walked over to the dresses. Some were torn when he thought Weiwei Bai had run away. But later, he kept thinking about her, thinking that he was possessed, so he finished sewing the dresses. Because she had worn them before. He picked up the uniform and the cat ears. He thought of her squatting at his door in the middle of the night, meowing timidly. He couldn't help but smile. Weiwei, look, I sewed a lot of princess dresses for you. These aren't for anime characters. They're dresses I designed for you. You'll look good in them. In the past 3 years, there have been more and more cases of zombies attacking humans. There were many high-level zombies, and some of them were as smart as the geniuses on the human side. However, not a single zombie king appeared. So under Song Yunhuan's urging, humans finally gathered together to build strong cities to defend against the terrifying zombies. Then, all the surviving humans were lured into the city. Today was the day that everyone would be vaccinated. It was also the day when the humans thought that they would be completely victorious. Song Yunhuan sat in the middle of a pile of dresses. His smile was still gentle, but his eyes were red. The redness started from the middle of his eyes and spread throughout his eyes. After eating the blue vaccine, although he became flesh and blood, his strength and ability to control zombies didn't change at all. He thought that he could keep his promise to Weiwei Bai, live a lifetime to remember her. But he was wrong. After losing her, He began to hate every aspect of the world. They could have been together, but because of the siege of the humans, he had lost her completely. This hatred had finally crushed the last shred of humanity in him. Song Yinhuan got up and went to the kitchen to cook. The dishes were all Wei Wei Bai's favorites. He put the dishes on the table, then took out a bowl of rice and put it on the table. Then he went to the other side of the table and sat down, smiling gently. Wei Wei, it's time to eat. But there was no one on the other side. Chapter 270. The room was empty, devoid of life. Song Yinhuan didn't know how long he had been sitting there. His eyes were empty, and his smile was sad. Suddenly, he reached out his hand, and it started to turn blue. The vaccine was his modified poison. After taking it, it wouldn't be affected by the zombie poison for a while, but after that, the body would start to turn to ash. It was very similar to Wei Wei Bai's death. Anyway, if she died, the crowd, the beautiful campus, the fun amusement park, it would all be meaningless. Might as well follow her and die together with her. Song Yunhuan's body started to break apart, and the blue light filled the room. You'll be angry, right, Wei Wei? But I can't stand losing you in this world. Yi Yushuan couldn't describe the pain. He looked at Wei Wei Bai with great sadness. He slowly reached out, wanting to touch her, but worried that she would break, just like the woman in his dream. But Bai Wei Wei avoided his hand like she was avoiding the plague. What's wrong? Wei Wei Bai and Yi Yushuan weren't that close. They'd only met a few times, and they knew that it was just a business marriage. Why did Yi Yushuan look like he was an abandoned woman? Yi Yushuan's voice was cold and deep. Is it you? Underneath the cold question was the despair of a man who'd experienced too many dreams. Wei Wei Bai didn't know what he was talking about, but she said naturally, I have to go. Thank you for coming to see me today. Yi Yushuan was probably here because he saw that she was sick, so he came to take care of her, to fulfill his responsibility as a fiancé. After saying that, she stepped forward. But before she could take 2 steps, her arm was suddenly pulled, and she was pushed against the wall in a daze. Before Wei Wei Bai could react, Yi Yushuan hugged her and kissed her hard. Wei Wei Bai, just as she was about to resist, she heard a sharp warning from the system. Forceful activation of energy feedback. Host's lifespan has been forcefully extended. Target, Yi Yushuan. 15 days. 10. 1 day. 1 hour. 1 minute. The host's life is in great danger. Newbie gift pack activated. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining 3 days of vegetative state life. Wei Wei Bai felt a tightness in her chest. She was so angry that she vomited a mouthful of blood. Then, she was swept away by a wave of darkness. 15 days of her life. Yi Yushuan felt her body soften. Blood flowed from the corner of her mouth, and she fainted. He hugged her blankly, as if he didn't know how to react. Qin Xiu, who was on the night shift, saw that Yi Yushuan's lips were stained with blood. He held Wei Wei Bai, who also had blood on her lips, and sat at the door of the ward. Qin Xiu. It couldn't be that Yi Yushuan suddenly became estrus. Since he couldn't kiss her, he bit her instead. Then Wei Wei Bai couldn't resist, so she was bitten into such a miserable state. So did he run into the scene of a forced kiss? He should have said that he couldn't hold it in for too long. Look, he was so anxious that he forced it. What a beast. The goal of this mission is to obtain Xie Yunting's love. Mission target, Xie Yunting. Time limit, 6 months. When Wei Wei Bai heard the system's voice, she angrily jumped up. 15 days. My 15 days. 004. It was rare that she would call its name. Unfortunately, the system didn't dare to respond. It shrunk its body and rolled a bit to hide itself. Emperor. Emperor, my little master. You can't call it that. Something big will happen. A shrill voice came from the side in panic. Only then did Bai Wei Wei realize that she had already changed places. Ancient furnishings, exquisite screens, antique tables and chairs, and a splendid decorative style. It was either rich or noble. Slash. Chapter 271. She turned her head to look and saw an old eunuch bowing as he looked at her with a worried expression. That eunuch's face was wrinkled like a chrysanthemum, and his voice was low and flustered. He looked outside and softly said, "This old servant knows that the emperor hates that thief Xie, but the situation is pressing. Just listen to this old servant and bear with it for the time being. Saving your life is more important, my good master." Wei Wei Bai discovered that the clothes she was wearing were not right. After transmigrating to several ancient times, she was familiar with ancient clothing. She lowered her head to look at her clothes. Although she was wearing an inner garment, it was clearly men's clothes. This is bad. Did she transmigrate into a man? Wei Wei Bai's expression changed, and before she could receive her memories, she heard muffled footsteps coming from outside. That eunuch's face was filled with fear. He immediately went forward and knelt on the ground. "This old servant greets Tai Fu." Wei Wei Bai looked up and saw that in the distance, a palace servant had opened the beaded curtain. A purple robe rolled in like a rolling cloud. Following that was a man's cold and gloomy voice. "It is said that the emperor has abandoned all of the civil and military ministers and refused to attend court. This official came to see what is wrong." That eunuch's entire body trembled. "Tai Fu, the emperor's illness is acting up again. This. He really can't get up." Illness acting up? That man's footsteps were very fast, and he had an incomparably cold aura. In the blink of an eye, he had already arrived by the bed. He was born very well. His phoenix eyes were slightly raised. His nose, mouth, and jaw were all exquisite and perfect. His black hair was combed, and he wore a jade crown, revealing his full forehead. Jade tree facing the wind. Even a distinguished style was not enough to describe his bearing. He stood outside the bed and saw the dazed Wei Wei Bai standing on the bed. He coldly smiled. "Isn't this very spirited? Even if it's acting up, it's the illness of hating me." When that eunuch heard this, he rolled and crawled over to hug his thigh. "Tai Fu, the emperor's health is just not good. He doesn't have this kind of thought in his heart." "Ah." The man kicked the eunuch away. "Dirty," he indifferently said. Then he turned his head and his phoenix eyes carried a malicious aura. "Emperor, it seems this official can't move you. Since this official is unwilling to sit on the throne, this official will send you on the road to meet the previous emperor." Wei Wei Bai silently knocked the system. "System, don't play dead. Where are the memories? I'll be on the road." Only then did the system dare to appear. "Please accept the memories of this body." That splitting headache attacked her again. She held her head, swayed a few times, and suddenly fell off the bed. She fell into a wide embrace, her fingers instinctively grabbing the other person's clothes. Her nose was filled with the scent of this embrace, and her face was incomparably pale. As for the man called Tai Tutor, he just caught the little emperor and was caught off guard. He actually hugged the little emperor. Her body was slender and weak, but when she pounced on him, she was like a gentle breeze, gently floating into his embrace. The man lowered his head and saw that her delicate face was full of sweat. Her face was as white as the snow in early winter. Her eyebrows were tightly knitted, and her face had a sickly air. It didn't seem like he was faking it. Wei Wei Bai wasn't pretending. She had never had a headache because of the memory transfer before. Her body was weak to this point. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but shout, "It hurts." Her voice was tender and weak, similar to a newborn bird. The man narrowed his phoenix eyes and stopped his action of throwing her out. Her body was too light. Although he knew that when the little emperor was still the crown prince, he had a small illness every 3 days and a big illness in half a month, but he didn't expect it to be this weak. That's good. The sooner she dies, the sooner she can be reincarnated. This dynasty, it's time to change its name. Ding. The male lead's favorability is -20. His hatred for you is so deep and beautiful. I hope you die early and reincarnate early. By Wei Wei. At the /crossover system, Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www.sashu.com. Download Transmigration system. Adonis, come here and read this on your phone. https://m/sashu.com. For the convenience of the next reading, you can click the Chapter 272. The man roughly threw her back on the bed. Then he turned to the people outside and said, "Call the imperial physician." Someone immediately went to call the imperial physician. Wei Bai saw the man again, expressionlessly looking down at her. It seems that the emperor is unable to take charge. There is no need to review the report. I will take it away. As for Chen Jingji's rebellion, I will take the blame for the emperor. When he finished, his phoenix eyes coldly glanced at the little emperor, without a trace of emotion in them. Then he lifted his foot and left. After a few steps, he suddenly heard the little emperor's low shout. "Xia Yunting, Zhen is fine. There is no need for you to review it yourself." Xia Yunting was about to go out, but the palace maid had already opened the beaded curtain. When he heard Wei Bai bluntly call his name, he was so scared that he let go of the curtain and knelt on the ground. His eyes were filled with malice, and then he turned back. The emperor can say it again. This official did not hear clearly. Wei was so nervous that she trembled. Her lips were pale, but her eyes seemed to burn with anger. She was astonishingly beautiful. She opened her mouth several times, as if she wanted to scold him, but in the end, she hesitantly said, "Xie, Taifu, please let Zhen's teacher go." Chen Jingji, who was going to be killed, was her teacher in this world. Xia Yunting thought that this little emperor was the same as before, not afraid of death and cursing. She even learned to speak humbly. But seeing the formerly insufferably arrogant crown prince, the current emperor, endure humiliation to survive, Xia Yunting's twisted desire for power flared up, and he felt unusually satisfied. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at -18. He looked sideways and saw her lying on the bed, her figure as delicate as a willow, pleading for mercy, but her eyes did not show the slightest intention of admitting defeat, bright as a star. Xia Yunting's heart stirred. Is the emperor asking this official for help? Sure enough, he saw the anger in Wei Bai's eyes grow. She was originally a proud son of heaven, but was beaten down to earth overnight. Her humiliation and grief were obvious. She gasped for breath and clenched her fists tightly. Because of her anger, her face was slightly flushed. For a moment, it was difficult to distinguish her gender. Xia Yunting had a strange feeling in his heart. Isn't this little emperor a little too good to be born? The light in her eyes was extinguished, and her expression finally became dispirited. "I beg you." Xia Yunting looked at her, neither salty nor light. At this moment, she was humble and low, while he was high and mighty. It was as if he was the emperor who ruled over life and death. Xia Yunting had enjoyed enough of the little emperor's fear and humiliation, and finally relented. Then let's first throw him into the death row prison. Then the emperor should properly recuperate. This official will withdraw. When Wei Bai saw him turn around and leave, her noble purple robes fluttered in the wind. She was insufferably arrogant. The imperial physician had just arrived and was about to take her pulse. Wei Bai finally couldn't take it anymore. She jumped up in anger and started smashing things. Scram! All of you scram! All of a sudden, the palace maids, eunuchs, and the most important imperial physician were thrown out. Xia Yunting hadn't gone far when he heard the little emperor's curses. Sure enough, it was still that brainless, arrogant, and despotic waste. After Wei Bai threw the imperial physician out, she sat on the bed with a pale face. She muttered to herself, "I'm going to die. If I take the pulse, it will definitely be exposed." She didn't have that thing down there. She wouldn't know. And the emperor definitely wasn't a woman, so she was a woman dressed as a man. Wasn't it possible to be finished at any moment? Wei Bai looked at the memory again, only to feel a splitting headache. This time, this plane was not easy to deal with. Download the https://www.sashu.com/ Download the full article https://www.sashu.com// Download the full article https://www.sashu.com Download the full article https://m/sashu.com Chapter 273. This time, she was called by Wei. Of course, her original name was still Wei Bai. The original owner was the Empress and the Emperor's legitimate child, a prince. In the past, the Empress and the peerless consort Shu fought for power in the harem. Although the Empress was the legitimate Empress, she was not favored by the Emperor. Her family was declining day by day, and she had no children. She had long been criticized by the harem. At that time, Consort Shu was pregnant, and the Emperor wanted to abolish the Empress. To keep her position, the Empress had no choice but to sleep with him. To have a child, she was willing to harm her health and take secret medicine to succeed. What went smoothly was that the Empress finally became pregnant. Unfortunately, it was a girl with a weak body. To have this child, the Empress had lost the ability to be a mother again, and a princess was clearly not enough for her to keep her position. In the face of imminent danger, she hardened her heart. With the help of her family and confidants, she changed Wei Bai from a true phoenix to a false phoenix, and a princess to a prince. At that time, the emperor was seriously ill, and the harem was in chaos. She was unexpectedly deceived. So Wei Bai became Bai Wei. Because she was the legitimate child, she naturally became the successor, commonly known as the crown prince. This was hidden for 16 years. Not only was this unlucky, even more unlucky was that Xie Yunting rebelled. Xie Yunting was this dynasty's monstrous genius. He was the bastard son of a declining family. Because he was abused by his mistress, he had a malicious and disagreeable personality. At a young age, he deeply understood the importance of power, so he planned step by step to get a chance to enter the academy. He became a disciple of a famous teacher, took the imperial exam at 15, and became the top scorer. In other words, he became the first person in the history of this dynasty to pass all 6 examinations. This kind of honor allowed him to prosper, and he quickly formed his own power in the court. In addition, the previous emperor was mediocre and incompetent. He listened to everything Xie Yunting said, and his power covered the sky. Wei Bai looked at the memories, and her mouth couldn't help but twitch. How could this be possible in reality? But in these invasion worlds, the conquered were like the center of the world. What all-purpose halo? King's aura? They were all covered in it. Why didn't she? Later on, because this guy's power was too great, the previous emperor, that good-for-nothing, finally felt that something was wrong. He wanted to cut down his wings, and even wanted to kill him. But Xie Yunting had already taken a step ahead, directly joining forces with Consort Shu, intending to have Consort Shu's son take the throne. With the help of Xie Yunting, Shu Fei attempted to force him to abdicate. In the end, he fell into Xie Yunting's trap. This man's ambition wasn't power, but rather the throne. Therefore, imperial concubine Shu and the emperor perished together. The most capable imperial concubine Shu's son was also killed by Xie Yunting. In addition, the empress had already passed away from illness, leaving behind only Bai Wei, who was frail and constantly suffering from major and minor illnesses. Xie Yunting smoothly became the regent, his power overflowing to the heavens. Once the situation stabilized, he would kill Wei Bai and take the throne. Wei Bai only wanted to sigh. She thought that the favorable impression points would only be -20, but in the end, the difficulty of this strategy was no different from -50. Wasn't this putting her in the position of a country and a beauty? Xie Yunting, this kind of power-hungry man, even if he killed all the women in the world, he still wanted the country. Wei Bai knocked on the system. Trash, did you die? Did you finish the previous side mission? Where's my cheat reward? The system lightly coughed. It's finished. Please accept the side mission reward, the ability to seduce people and lewd. Wei Bai dug her ears. Seduce people? Lewd what? This side mission reward, as soon as she heard it, wasn't anything serious. Slash button at the bottom to record this reading record. Chapter 274. System. It means that everyone who looks at you thinks you're very flirtatious, very seductive, and very attractive. Wei Bai was about to spit out blood. This was a moving aphrodisiac. How could this be considered a proper strategy? This was more like a meat text. Wei Bai was so angry that her eyes were on fire. What about my 15 days? What about my 15 days? I don't care if you use my life points to buy snacks or eye drops or whatever. I'll just treat it as charity to a beggar. But Yi Yuxuan, that jinx, came over and kissed me, and my 15 days were gone. If you don't give me an explanation today, I'm going to go on strike. Her life was so bitter. Other people's strategies were always good for her. She had been trying for so long, but she hadn't gotten anything. Those side rewards were even worse. When the plane ended, the reward would lose its effect. She couldn't bring it back to reality and couldn't bring it to the next plane. Every time she woke up, she was in the novice village. Why did she work so hard? Beggar. The system tried to explain. It's like this. In the world you live in, there is a kind of person who is innately at odds with you. That is, your auras are too similar. When the system rewards, it doesn't directly recognize the person, but the aura. And Yi Yuxuan's aura is very similar to yours. When the system can't distinguish, it will give the reward to the person with the strongest aura. He just happened to be too close to you. So the system directly took away your reward and put your life points on his side. Wei Wei gritted her teeth. So that's how it is. Yi Yuxuan, that jinx, has a natural enmity with me. When I go back, I'll immediately break off the engagement with him. Those who took her life points were all her sworn enemies. The system secretly wiped its sweat. It had finally muddled through. After Wei Wei was done being angry, she combed through the memories of this plane. Then she looked up at the old eunuch who had been kicked aside by Xie Yunting. The old eunuch was called Gao Jixiang. He was the confidant of the empress who had passed away. He also knew Wei Bai's true gender. He trembled as he tried to get up, but he still fell. Wei Bai rubbed her face and automatically assumed the personality of the original owner. Then, she reached out and slapped the bed. Where are the people? Are they all dead? Did they see that we were useless and went to curry favor with that monarch and fatherless traitor Xie Yunting? Where are the imperial physicians? Roll in here for us. When Gao Jixiang heard this, he was scared out of his wits. This little ancestor still considered the imperial palace, a place of tigers and wolves, her own home. Xie Yunting was now the one who could decide her life and death. He immediately staggered to his feet and endured the pain as he crawled to the bedside. Your Majesty, please don't shout anymore, my little ancestor. Wei Bai held back until her face turned red. For a moment, her eyes moved around, and her charm was natural. Even Gao Jixiang, the old eunuch, felt that something was wrong. That's right, the little master is about to come of age. Who knows how long this cross-dressing can be hidden? When they were young, it was not easy to distinguish between men and women, but when they grew up, the difference between men and women was too obvious. Gao Jixiang immediately became worried. The imperial physician was thrown around by Wei Bai, but still came in. As a result, Wei Bai immediately had the imperial physician look at Gao Jixiang's injuries. Right now, Gao Jixiang was her trusted aide. She couldn't let Xie Yunting kick him to death, and the teacher she saved, Chun Jingji, was the same as her. He was loyal and devoted to the emperor and hated Xie Yunting to the bone. Gao Jixiang was moved to tears. His little master had grown up and knew how to feel sorry for this useless servant. After looking at the injuries, there were no major problems. Wei Bai slapped her forehead and decided, no, that traitor Xie Yunting is ruthless and black-hearted. We don't know how he will torment our benevolent teacher. Let's go to the death row prison and take a look. Gao Jixiang almost fainted again. How were they going to the death row prison? They were going to court death. Chapter 275. Xie Yunting's finger rested on the memorials. His eyes were as calm as ink. These memorials, kill them all. With a single sentence, life and death were decided in a moment. These were all selected from a large pile of flattering memorials, specifically to scold him. Those who scolded him, of course, were going against him. Even the previous emperor did not have a good death for going against him. So what were these ants? The people below immediately complied. The eunuch monitoring Wei Bai also came in, carefully explaining to him what Wei Bai had done and how she reacted. Hearing Wei Bai call him a traitor, Xie Yunting raised an eyebrow. His lips curved into a smile that made people shudder. Truly a filial child. Knowing that her father is worried about her, she can't wait to go accompany her short-lived relatives. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at -25. Wei Wei Bai heard the notification, once again confirming that the target was narrow-minded and that this person was asking for a beating. Teacher, Zhan has implicated you. Although Chen Jingji was her teacher, he was not very old, in his 20s. Like Xie Yunting, he was also very smart. But in stark contrast to Xie Yunting, Chen Jingji was especially stupidly loyal. In any case, no matter how muddle-headed Wei Wei Bai was, he was loyal and devoted to her, never leaving her. Chen Jingji frowned, silently moving further away. Sharing the burden of His Majesty is this humble subject's duty. How can there be implicating? His Majesty is too much for this humble subject. Wei Wei Bai, then why are you so far away from Zhan? She stood outside the cell. At first, Chen Jingji was very close to her. But before she could react, his expression suddenly changed. He automatically ran to the farthest wall of the cell, sticking close to it, wishing he could disappear. Did she have body odor? So disgusted? Chen Jingji looked at her awkwardly, his face red. This humble subject has had an instinct to avoid danger since childhood. Seeing His Majesty, I don't know how, he always felt that Wei Wei Bai was very dangerous and should not be approached. It was not like this in the past. Could it be that Her Majesty seemed to be prettier than yesterday? He quickly suppressed these terrible and rebellious thoughts. Beautiful was used to describe women, not the emperor. Wei Wei Bai, she's as ugly as a tiger. Is that why she's dangerous? The system reminded her. The male lead is here. He's outside. Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips, took a deep breath, and then pounced on the cell door. Teacher, you are the only person I can trust now. I will definitely save you. Chen Jingji was very touched, but when he saw her big, watery eyes, as if they were seducing him, he automatically moved deeper into the cell. His Majesty today was so scary and dangerous. What a good show of deep affection between master and disciple. In contrast, this subject looks like that repulsive traitor. A mocking voice came from behind him. Bai Weiwei's whole body trembled. Fear flashed through her eyes, but soon, her stubborn pride made her straighten up again. Even if she was in dire straits, she had been the crown prince for so many years, and now she was the emperor of this dynasty. Chen Jingji saw her reaction clearly, and his heart clenched. Wei Wei Bai turned around and saw Xie Yunting sitting in a chair not far away, watching the play for who knows how long. Xie Yunting's phoenix eyes were also staring at her. Her figure was petite, and perhaps because she had not yet grown up, she gave people the feeling of holding her in one hand. Because she was angry, her face was ruddy, and her illness was gone, adding a bit of brightness. Chapter 276. Xie Yunting had been handsome since he was a child. Who knew how many sincere or false praises he had heard? But today, he discovered that no matter how good his appearance was, he couldn't compare to this delicate little emperor. He had never carefully looked at this stepping stone destined to a short life, but today, he really did see her like a spring flower. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to -20. Wei Wei Bai hadn't done anything yet, so how did the favorability increase? Xie Yunting was too fickle. Xie Yunting, we order you to release our teacher. Wei Wei Bai's face was stubborn, her tone aggressive, but her body couldn't stop shaking. It was really annoying and pitiful to look at. Because of Xie Yunting's obsession with power, it created a twisted and dark mentality. He was particularly fond of offending his superiors, and especially liked the pleasure of humiliating people higher than him into the mud. And Wei Wei Bai was undoubtedly the target he wanted to humiliate. If she was a yes man, unable to withstand a single blow, he wouldn't even look at this little emperor. On the contrary, the more stubborn she was, the more he wanted to break her pride and make her kneel and beg for mercy. Xie Yunting's phoenix eyes flashed with a dark light. This Minister Chun has committed a grave crime. If the emperor says to release him, I'm afraid it won't be enough to convince the public. Wei Wei Bai was so anxious that she was about to explode. She had been pampered since she was a child, and her temper was already big. Now, anxiety and fear combined with hatred flared up. She crazily rushed in front of him, reaching out and grabbing his collar. Xie Yunting, you are simply a big traitor. Big. Traitor. Traitor. You're a traitor. She seemed to have never come into contact with any foul language, so even when cursing her enemy, she only knew how to call him a traitor. Xie Yunting was originally angry because of her actions, but then he was amused by her stupidity in scolding people. He laughed and laughed, then suddenly grabbed her clothes and hugged her. She sat directly on his lap. Wei Bai trembled and her face turned even redder. It was as if she had been dyed with rouge, and her face was as bright as a flower. Release me, thief Xie. Xie Yunting felt as if he was hugging a soft cloud. It actually felt good to the touch. He furrowed his brows. This little emperor was practically raised to the point where his limbs were not diligent. A man was actually so soft and soft. He reached out and pinched her waist. Your Majesty, have you forgotten the taste of blood? How dare you make a fuss in front of me? Now, it's not up to you to decide who lives and who dies. Wei Bai's waist was sensitive. Being pinched by him, the numbing shiver made her stiffen. She couldn't help but glare fiercely at him. Her eyes were watery and very seductive. Xie Yunting felt an itch in his heart. He couldn't help but raise his eyes to take a closer look. He saw that her cheeks were pink, and her clothes were disheveled from the struggle. Her collar was loose, revealing her delicate neck. A faintly discernible fragrance lingered in his nose. Xie Yunting suddenly lost control. He looked at her with a sinister and frightening expression. Wei Bai was furious. It's clearly you who's rebelling, yet you say others are rebelling. You're simply. Her voice weakened. She seemed to be unable to hold on. Her eyes were moist. If you let go of my teacher, I'll give you the throne. Okay? This was the only compromise she could make after being pushed to the limit. It was as if Qin Jingji had become the last important person to her. She had to protect him, even if she had to sacrifice everything. Wei Bai begged for mercy, feeling particularly embarrassed. She couldn't help but lower her head and look longingly at Xie Yunting. This expression was unknowingly seductive, innocent, but charming. Xie Yunting's body tightened. He frowned in embarrassment. But Wei Bai angrily blurted out, if you don't want to, then don't want to. What are you hiding a dagger under my but to stab me for? Xie Yunting's lips trembled. He looked at her as if he wanted to eat her. Chapter 277. Not waiting for Xie Yunting to act, Wei Bai disliked the thing under her butt, and she twisted her body. He immediately groaned, and a suspicious blush flashed across his face. Even the fingers holding her waist tightened. Wei Bai, it's not like a dagger, short and blunt. Short. Xie Yunting finally couldn't bear it. He reached out and pushing Wei Bai to the ground. Gao Jixiang immediately ran over in panic, supporting Wei Bai as she rolled to the ground. Wei Bai fell to the ground, her eyes shining with golden light. Her body couldn't withstand the fall. She only felt that everything in front of her was black. Xie Yunting couldn't sit still. He felt a fire burning under his belly. He suddenly stood up, his expression frighteningly cold, although the robe was loose enough to cover the awkward protrusion. But the people present were all shrewd. Hearing the little emperor's naive and laughable words, their eyes changed. The guard at the door, the eunuch next to him, and Qin Jingji, who was leaning against the cell wall, all looked at Xie Yunting in shock and disbelief. Then they remembered that Xie Yunting was bad, but he didn't get close to women. That was a rule. Could it be that it wasn't self-control, but rather a homosexual? This homosexual even went as far as to cut the emperor. Not only was this treacherous, it was simply going against the natural order of things. Xie Yunting also felt that he was bewitched. He casually hugged this waist, and his body inexplicably reacted. It was simply an extraordinary shame and humiliation. Wei Bai's head was dizzy, and her face was red. She angrily shouted at him, "You can kill me or scrape me as you wish. We will not yield to you." If this was a normal time, Xie Yunting would have stabbed her with his sword. In any case, it wasn't difficult to support another puppet. Letting Bai Wei temporarily take the throne was also because the crown prince was justified. But he didn't know why, But when he saw her angry and delicate little face, all kinds of complicated thoughts passed through his mind. He didn't think of killing her for a while. His face was overcast, and his voice was as cold as winter. Invite the emperor back, and his gaze slowly shifted to Wei Wei Bai, but quickly shifted to Chen Jingji. He looked at Chen Jingji's serious face and finally found a sense of calmness. Also, clear the area. Except for his own confidence and Chen Jingji, the rest of the people who heard the little emperor say his reaction were going to be obliterated. Of course, Gao Jixiang had also escaped because of the little emperor. After Wei Wei Bai was sent back to her sleeping quarters, she really couldn't get up. This broken body was too weak. Running 2 steps made her gasp. She estimated that when Xie Yunting lay flat on the ground, she wouldn't have the strength to do anything. Gao Jixiang wiped his tears. How can that thief Xie have such filthy thoughts? If he dares to do anything to the emperor, this old servant will risk his life to stop him. Wei Wei Bai was at a loss. What dirty thoughts? Thief Xie will kill me sooner or later. You are not important. If you can escape, then escape. Don't die for me. Gao Jixiang saw that she was so naive and knew that she didn't understand at all. Also, the empress was busy fighting for power, and because of Wei Wei Bai's secret, she didn't let anyone with ulterior motives get close to her. So she didn't understand anything. The old eunuch was worried. What should he do? Who would have thought that Xie Yunting, that big traitor, was a homosexual? Xie Yunting was tired of looking at the memorials and pushed them aside. His confidant eunuch came over and respectfully said, Tai Fu, please rest. He coldly asked, what did the little emperor do? The eunuch explained in detail what Wei Wei Bai had done, and then said, just now, the emperor had people send wine. This servant specifically had people send strong wine. Xie Yunting's eyes suddenly became cold. Strong wine was nothing to others, but with the little emperor's congenitally deficient body, if he drank a few more times, he would probably die. He fiercely slapped the table. Who told you to send it? // To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the button at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 278. The eunuch shivered and knelt on the ground. Isn't this what you wanted? Let the little emperor return to heaven as soon as possible. This was the consensus of the people around Xie Yunting. Xie Yunting remembered that he really wanted the little emperor to die quickly. And what was he doing? He was worried that the wine would kill her. Xie Yunting felt like he was possessed. Was it because he had been holding it in for too long? He pursed his lips, his face more sinister. After reading the memorials and handling the affairs, he went back to rest. As soon as he returned to his room, he saw the palace maids kneeling on the ground outside. Who let them kneel here? Xie Yunting stopped and coldly swept his eyes over those people. The person serving him immediately said, Tai Fu, these girls are just the right age. It's cold, so it's good to have more bed warmers. Xie Yunting originally wanted to kick the door open, but he walked in without a change in expression. But he didn't know why. When he thought of bed warmers, the little emperor's angry face appeared in front of his eyes. He was clearly a young boy who was still wet behind the ears. Xie Yunting held his breath. Maybe he really had been holding it in for too long. He walked in front of the palace maids and looked at them one by one. They were all unbearable to look at. Finally, there was one that was pleasing to the eye. He was about to raise his hand when he suddenly found that the palace maid's face was so familiar. She looked like the little emperor. Xie Yunting's heart was unsettled. He angrily raised his sleeve. Get out of here. Then he walked into the room and saw that there were more than a dozen handsome boys kneeling in the room. His confidant immediately said, Tai Fu, if the palace maids don't like them, there are others. Although Xie Yunting ordered people to clear the scene, more or less, some rumors still spread. Those who wanted to curry favor immediately sent people over, hoping that when Xie Yunting became emperor in the future, they could follow him and soar into the sky. Xie Yunting's face was even darker. He gritted his teeth. If you don't get out, don't blame me. When these words came out, he was really angry. Everyone immediately ran out, fearing that they would be killed by the Tai Fu. And the rumors in the palace were even worse. The Tai Fu didn't want men, didn't want women, and only had feelings for the little emperor. Even Xie Yunting rebelled to get the little emperor. This kind of overbearing Tai Fu fell in love with me. When the gossip system heard this, it immediately followed suit and ran to tell the host. There was gossip, the happiest. Bai Weiwei touched her face. Blame me for being peerless. The system was impressed by her shameless demeanor. It seems like the seduction is working. This temperament, it was originally a seductive. Xie Yunting. I reckon that when he comes back to his senses, he will come to kill me with his sword. It would be strange if he didn't want to kill him. After Bai Weiwei finished speaking, she poured another glass of wine and drank it to the moon. This body is not good. Her alcohol tolerance is still okay. Weiwei Bai was originally a person with a low alcohol tolerance. Seeing that she couldn't drink a few cups, she couldn't help but drink more. Gao Jixiang was scared witless. Weiwei Bai's body couldn't stand the tossing. He immediately came to dissuade her. Emperor, don't drink too much. Your body is not good. Weiwei Bai originally wanted to put down the cup, but when she heard the system's reminder that the male lead had killed his way to the door, she immediately adjusted her state and put the cup on the table. What nonsense. Pour the wine. Anyway, it's good that I'm dead. In this palace, who doesn't want me to die quickly? Gao Jixiang secretly wiped his tears. His little master was too wronged. Weiwei Bai saw that he didn't pour the wine, so she poured the wine herself. She hated that she couldn't drink herself to death. Gao Jixiang was worried. He could only grab the wine bottle and not let her drink. Weiwei Bai was angry. She suddenly burst into tears. She threw the cup against the door. Xie Yunting, who was standing outside the door, was about to push open the door, but his hand couldn't help but stop. Slash. Slash. Chapter 279. Weiwei Bai's indignant sobbing voice came from inside. How could he rebel? Anyone in the world can rebel. Why did he have to rebel? What did it mean? Xie Yunting couldn't take a step inside and stood silently outside. The old eunuch's anxious voice came. Isn't this just knowing a person for a long time without understanding his heart? Master, don't be sad. Weiwei Bai's tears fell desperately. She was drunk and not as tough as a hedgehog. I still remember when he was paraded through the streets. I begged mother for a long time before I could sneak out of the palace to see him, so drunk that I even forgot how to call myself. Top scorer? When Xie Yunting heard this, he remembered that year when he was the top scorer, parading through the streets with flowers. At that time, the whole city ran to see him. The little emperor also went. Later, when I returned to the palace, I was seriously ill and was scolded to death by mother. But I don't regret it. Who is Xie Yunting? 6 yuan. I worship him to death. Standing outside the door, Xie Yunting was completely unprepared for her to say worship. He remembered the first time he saw her, when the palace was already stained with blood. At that time, he didn't have any impression, but the hatred in her eyes was a bit clearer. The little emperor's voice softened. Gee, you don't know how powerful Xie Yunting was at that time. How beautiful. All the women threw flowers at him. Her innocent words were spoken in a soft tone. Like a feather, it could float into people's hearts. Ding. The male lead's favorability is at -15. Weiwei Bai drank wine, and in a good mood, she began to dance. Later, he was just like I thought, able to be an official very well. Do you know how happy I was? Every time I heard him solve a problem, I could eat a few more bowls of rice that day, and even the medicine didn't feel bitter. Gao Jixiang began to cry again. His little master worshipped Xie Yunting so much. He used to spend a lot of time with the empress, but he didn't know. Weiwei Bai was excited. She ran to rummage through the cabinets. Then, she pulled out a small box. Every time he has a painting, I'll get someone to send it over. I have a lot of them. He loves painting the most. Weiwei Bai sorted through her memories. Of course she knew how much the original owner hated Xie Yunting. Because Xie Yunting was too monstrous, every time he did something glorious, the empress would nag at the original owner. It was like how other people's children were so outstanding, but why were they so trashy? After such a long time, it would be strange if the original host had a good impression of Xie Yunting. As for the paintings, It was because the original owner tore them to vent her anger when she was angry. She could use the fact that she collected paintings to prove that she was a fangirl. No matter what Xiaoyunting did, he would definitely treat his own worshippers better. However, when she opened the box, her expression changed. Damn, the paintings were all tattered, and many of them had holes in them. There were even a few that had Xiaoyunting's death scrawled on them. The original owner of this body actually hated other people's outstanding children so much. If she was seen, she would definitely die. Wei Wei Bai took advantage of the fact that Gao Jixiang hadn't seen to quickly grab the wine jug and pour it over. Then she coldly said, I forgot. The person I admired the most has already rebelled. I actually kept these things. I'm ashamed to face my ancestors. Saying this, she lit a match and threw it. The paintings burst into flames. Xiaoyunting just happened to push open the door and see the tattered paintings in the flames. They really were his. Wei Wei Bai stood in front of the fire, her eyes moist with infinite grief. I once thought that if I became emperor, I would give him the best position, so that no one could bully or humiliate him. Tears fell from her cheeks, but her words were incomparably sincere. I also thought that if I became emperor, I would definitely not be able to be free. At that time, he would be able to take my place and see the prosperity and beauty of the world. Our ruler and minister would be harmonious. He would guard the country for me, and I would protect him for a lifetime of glory. For a moment, Xiaoyunting didn't dare to step forward. Her words heavily struck the wall of his heart. But he actually rebelled. Chapter 280. Xiaoyunting had never thought that this little emperor would worship him. He had won 6 times in a row, a bright future ahead of him. Many people flattered him, and there were also admirers. But to be like the little emperor, to give him the best position, to let him guard the country, there was not a single one. His thoughts were deep, and his face did not show the least bit of surprise. Before he could walk over, he saw Wei Wei Bai stagger back a few steps and then suddenly fall down. Gao Jixiang reached out to pull her up, but before he could, she had already fallen into Xiaoyunting's arms. Wei Wei Bai was drunk. This weak body, coupled with the alcohol, made her dizzy. She leaned like a cat in Xiaoyunting's arms, her face bright red, and she was quiet. Xiaoyunting wanted to push her away, but thinking of what she had just said, his cold heart softened a lot. She was just a child with a short life. He had rebelled, and it was normal for her to hate and loathe him. When the situation in the court stabilized enough, and all the powers outside the court were eradicated, he would be able to change the dynasty and sit on the throne. She had no use for him, so she would die. So letting her live comfortably during this time could be considered his benevolence. Xiaoyunting picked her up. Under Gao Jixiang's guarded gaze, he couldn't help but say coldly, "Your body is like this, and you still let her drink." The old eunuch wrinkled his chrysanthemum face. Didn't Xiaoyunting always want his master to die early? Now the cat crying for the mouse, what was he going to do with this fake benevolence? He wasn't going to make a move on his little master, was he? Xiaoyunting didn't think too much about it. He put her on the bed. Just as he was about to leave, Wei Wei Bai suddenly opened her eyes. She looked at him foolishly, her watery eyes reflecting his figure. Suddenly she smiled, her bright red face like a peach blossom. "Minister Xia, you came. Accompany me to see how my painting is." After she finished speaking, she got up in a daze, grabbed Xiaoyunting, and ran to the other side of the palace, pulling out a chest. It was filled with paintings. "Look, I'm the one who drew it. I saw that you were so good at it, so I couldn't help but follow suit." She took out the scroll painting and opened it. A gentle breeze brushed past the willows, and a small boat stood upright. It was a beautiful scene. These paintings were all drawn by the Empress for the original owner to learn. As the original owner studied, he gnashed his teeth and tore apart Xiaoyunting's authentic paintings. The greater the hatred, the greater the resentment. How could Xiaoyunting be unfamiliar with his own painting? This was a painting he had painted, but this painting was clearly a copy of the little emperor's own painting. Although he didn't have enough spiritual energy, he was very meticulous and serious. No matter how cold-hearted a person was, when he saw his admirer carefully imitating his painting, His heart couldn't help but feel warm. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at -10. Wei Wei Bai was so drunk that she forgot that Xie Yunting was a great trader. She pulled him along and nagged about her admiration for him. She even placed the painting in front of him and took a brush for him to sign. How did you draw? Everyone says that you draw well. I'm so happy. When you went to court and refuted those old rotten wood until they couldn't show their face, I was so happy. Ha ha ha. You didn't wait for me to be emperor, and you became the highest official yourself. You really are the man I fancy. Xie Yunting had heard a lot of flattery, but he had never heard such a straightforward praise. He lowered his head and couldn't help but carefully look at her. Without the bitter hatred, his eyes were filled with pure joy, and for no reason, there was a bit more of a pleasing feeling. Wei Wei Bai said and said, her voice lowering. Then her head tilted, and she leaned against his shoulder and fell asleep. // The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 281. Xie Yunting didn't like people getting close to him like this. He reached out to push her away, but when his fingers touched her body, he felt it was soft and warm. She seemed to be uncomfortable, her mouth making small gasping sounds. As soon as he saw it, evil thoughts rose in his mind again. Xie Yunting's face darkened, as if he had seen a ghost. He clenched his fists, his ears red. Then, as if he wanted to escape something, he pushed Wei Wei Bai to the ground. He turned and left, his footsteps chaotic. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to -5. Wei Wei Bai was still sleeping. She was drunk and couldn't be woken up by the beating of drums and gongs. After Xie Yunting returned to his room, the eunuch was about to say something. But when he looked up, he saw his gloomy and cold face, his eyes cold and ferocious. The eunuch was scared and didn't dare say anything. Xie Yunting said, I want to bathe. He hesitated, then said, cold water. He thought it would be better to bathe in cold water, but the result was that he couldn't fall asleep. He waited until dawn and finally closed his eyes for a while. But he dreamt of the little emperor, gently undressing him. Her lips were red, her eyes were watery, her body was delicious and delicate. It woke him up with a fright. At the same time, his lower body woke up. Xie Yunting's expression changed again and again as he looked at his lower body. Could it be that was he really cut sleeve? Wei Wei Bai yawned as she went to court. There were 2 dragon chairs, one for her, one for the Grand Tutor. Of course, the Grand Tutor's chair turned from a dragon to a flood dragon, but his ambition was very obvious. When she arrived, Xie Yunting was already sitting on the flood dragon's chair, his face gloomy and frightening. Seeing her come, his eyes shot out ice swords. Wei Wei Bai's face was also dark. She didn't have a good expression at all. The atmosphere in court was very oppressive. The civil and military officials were all trembling, not daring to speak loudly. After they finally finished talking about some important matters of the country, they finally circled back to some safer topics. For example, this year's winter snow hunt. The royal family had snow hunts every year, but this year it was more chaotic because Xie Yunting rebelled, and now he held the emperor in one hand. As a result, many processes were omitted. But the emperor was still around, so these ceremonies had to be carried out. One of the ministers even asked for the emperor's opinion. Wei Wei Bai, who had been chatting with the system, didn't react for a while. Xie Yunting thought she hadn't heard, and asked in an icy tone, Your Majesty, do you still need to prepare for this year's snow hunt? Wei Wei Bai's eyes were even colder than his. Shouldn't the Grand Tutor be in charge of this? I'm half dead anyway, what else can I prepare? Just prepare a coffin for me. Yesterday, when she was drunk, she looked at him with eyes full of worship and admiration. It was so gentle that it made him feel warm. Now that he was awake, the way he looked at him was as if he had been dipped in poison. With this contrast, Xie Yunting, who originally didn't care about the little emperor's mood, actually felt dissatisfied. Xie Yunting coldly snorted. It seems that the emperor is truly tired of living. How about this minister send you on your way? Wei Wei Bai slapped the dragon throne. If you send me, then send me. If you don't send me, then you're a turtle. I see that you're looking at this dragon throne with red eyes. You might as well kill me now and sit on it yourself. When she was angry, her voice was no longer soft, only hard and cold. Xia Yunting thought of yesterday when she took his hand, her soft palm pressed against his fingers. Grand Tutor, just give me an autograph. I will cherish it. When he woke up from the alcohol, there was no trace of last night's gentleness. He hated her so much that he couldn't wait to fight with his life. Download the https://www.sashu.com/ Download the full article https://www.sashu.com// Download the full article https://www.sashu.com. Download the full article https://m.sashu.com, Chapter 282. Xia Yunting didn't know why, but his heart felt stifled. I was afraid the emperor would be too lonely, so I sent all the eunuchs and maids in your palace, as well as that extremely evil Chun Jingji in prison, to accompany you. Wei Wei Bai suddenly stood up. Like a little beast, she flew into a rage and jumped directly onto his dragon chair. Then she pounced on him, tearing at him. Xia Yunting, you are extremely evil. You have a vicious heart, deceiving the emperor, and you, her eyes were filled with hatred and sorrow. You have failed us, you have failed us. As soon as these words came out, everyone present felt something was wrong. Failed? Who failed? In the end, how did he fail? Everyone's ears were as long as a donkey's, but they didn't dare to raise their heads, fearing they would be hacked to death by the imperial tutor. Xia Yunting knew that when she said he failed, she meant he failed to live up to her trust. After all, she used to worship him so much. But why did he feel that her weeping feeling was very wrong? Before he could think about it, she pulled at his clothes, loosening his belt. With this loosening, the clothes inside also loosened. Wei Wei Bai still didn't care. Her fingers tore at his clothes like a bully. How could Xia Yunting allow her to be so presumptuous? He reached out and clasped her hands, pressing her against the chair. The chair was large, and the two rolled together. If you want to die so much, why don't I see you hanging yourself from the beam? Xia Yunting said coldly. Wei Wei Bai was so angry that her blood rushed to her head. Even if we want to hang ourselves, we will first strangle your head. We were really blind. You. She suddenly shut her mouth, as if she had said something wrong. If Xia Yunting hadn't seen her last night, he might not have known what she was talking about. How much she worshipped him. How much she hated him now. Xia Yunting felt that he didn't care what she thought, so he coldly threw away this thought. Only then did he realize how ambiguous their position was. That faintly discernible fragrance wafted up. Xia Yunting lowered his eyes to look, only to see her curled up under him. Perhaps because she was staring at him, the corners of her eyes were red and flirtatious. The evil fire that he had been suppressing surged up again. Wei Wei Bai was confused. Why do you always hide something in your pants? It's very hard. Xia Yunting was both embarrassed and resentful. His anger and lust surged up, and he really wanted to strangle her. Shut up. Then, he quickly got up and wanted to fling his sleeves and leave, but he found that she was lying on the chair. That delicate and weak appearance was actually very beautiful. She then thought of how many pairs of eyes were looking at her in the imperial court. Xia Yunting turned and picked her up, then coldly looked down. If there's nothing to do, court is dismissed. After saying that, he rushed straight to the bedroom. Throwing her onto the bed, his eyes burned with madness as he reached out to pull off her clothes. Wei Wei Bai didn't understand and hurriedly knocked on the system. Fuck, what's going on? Xia Yunting's personality isn't that impulsive. The system calmly flipped through the data. Oh, this seductive temperament has a prominent effect on virgins. Moreover, if he can't find relief after a few times, he'll go crazy and want to force himself on her. Wei Wei Bai hated that she couldn't strangle the system. It actually didn't say such an important thing. And Xia Yunting was actually a virgin? So old and still a virgin, he must have a sexual dysfunction. She reached out to resist. Xie Yunting, wake up. Isn't it just pulling off your clothes? You're so stingy that you want to pull them back. Xie Yunting suddenly stopped. What was he doing? He was so impulsive that he had such evil thoughts about her. Something was wrong. Wei Wei, Bai suddenly felt a cold sensation on her neck. A snow-white dagger was placed against her neck. Xie Yunting's eyes were still burning, but they were rolling with a dark coldness. What drug did you give me to make me crazily yearn for you day and night? Slash, slash, forward slash, forward slash. Chapter 283. Wei Wei Bai's eyelashes trembled a few times. See what? As soon as this sentence came out, Xie Yunting found that his reason had disappeared. This kind of words that could be used against him unexpectedly came out like this. Wei Wei Bai didn't care what he said. Her attention was on his knife. It seems that Tai Fu is also afraid of death, always carrying a knife on him. Or is it that you can't wait these past few days and can't wait to kill me? She was like a hedgehog. Every time she saw him, she would stab him. Xie Yunting looked her up and down, his body still burning, but his mind was unusually calm. What was it about her that aroused his desire? Was it because her face was so beautiful, without a trace of masculinity? Or was it because her fingers were too soft, her smell too good, her lips too? As he continued to size him up, he realized that something was wrong again. Xie Yunting hurriedly stopped his dirty thoughts. He knew that he couldn't be interested in a man. Could it be that he had been holding it in for too long? Wei Wei Bai frowned, the suspicion in her eyes growing. If you want to kill me, then kill me. The Xie Yunting I know is not as indecisive as you. Her eyes were clear, without a trace of guilt. Xie Yunting thought of her temperament and knew that she couldn't hide her thoughts. So it was because he had been holding it in for too long? Xie Yunting put away his knife, slowly got up, and then got out of bed with a gloomy face. He couldn't convince himself to go to a man. A cold shower would be fine. He heard Wei Wei Bai get out of bed and couldn't help but walk out quickly. It was as if he was afraid of ruining his normal 3 views if he walked too slowly. Wei Wei Bai, I thought it would be exposed. This body was young, not fully developed, and the chest was tied up, plus the original owner was raised as a boy. There was no trace of a woman's temperament. Except for the weak appearance, it wasn't much different from a boy. But once the clothes were taken off, it was useless to have a heroic temperament. The system said, "You're thinking too much." It's a very painful process for a man to accept that he's gay. If he really did you, wouldn't he be accepting that he's gay? That's why he would definitely struggle. Wei Wei Bai asked, "What if you're done struggling?" The system said, "Don't worry, the seductive temperament is one of the strongest temperaments. He won't be able to resist this kind of temptation since he's a virgin." Wei Wei Bai, damn, I'm even more worried. Xie Yunting looked at the row of handsome boys in front of him. His trusted eunuch smiled and said, "Grand Tutor, look, these are all very clean. Furthermore, I've already fasted in advance and washed that area. It definitely won't affect the use of it." Xie Yunting, where? The eunuch was used to this kind of scene, so he answered very naturally, "It's that perverted flower. Men can only do this kind of thing. It's absolutely clean. You can't even smell it." Xie Yunting's face was ashen. The eunuch thought he couldn't wait any longer. After all, the Grand Tutor ordered people to get a dozen delicate and pretty boys as soon as he arrived. He was really impatient. "Come, what are you all standing around for? Hurry up and serve the Grand Tutor." Which of the boys wasn't smart? Climbing up to Xie Yunting was like flying into the sky. They all rushed over, one rubbing his shoulders, one massaging his legs, and one tenderly offering grapes to the Grand Tutor. "Grand Tutor, this is my first time. Please take pity on me." Xie Yunting's whole body stiffened. He looked at the one offering grapes. His collar was open, and his flat chest was exposed. Slash. Chapter 284. The one massaging his leg had a clean-shaven beard, but the thick powder couldn't cover the beard holes. Not to mention the smell of the men in the room. He wasn't interested in women, so he had the eunuch send the men over. Because he began to doubt his sexual orientation. The results of the test, Yunting kicked all the boys out. He was afraid he wouldn't be able to resist pulling out his sword and hacking them to death. Too disgusting. He almost vomited. So where did his evil thoughts about the little emperor come from? Yunting couldn't figure it out. He looked out the window and saw that it had started to snow. Wei Bai saw the snow and silently wrapped the quilt around her head. Damn, this emperor was really a coward. It was cold, and there was no one in the palace to heat the floor. Because of her special status, everyone wanted to step on her, so there wasn't even a stove. Gao Jixiang rummaged through the cabinets and found a fox fur cloak for her. He was afraid that his master would be cold, so he quickly brought it over for her to wear. Wei Bai only felt warmer after wearing it. With great difficulty, the snow finally stopped. Wei Bai was afraid that she would freeze, so she went out to exercise. Because the palace was leaking air. It was said that during Xie Yunting's rebellion, the arrows accidentally pierced through the roof of the palace, and it hadn't been fixed yet. She looked at the golden splendor, but it was actually a useless room. Wei Bai saw that there was a lot of snow in front of the door, and there was no other exercise to do, so she started to make a snowman. After she finished, she wrote Xie Yunting's name on the snowman. The system said, "This snowman has a nose and eyes. How about we write a love poem on it? When the male lead sees it, his favorability will definitely increase." Wei Bai nodded, and then wrote on the snowman, "Xie Yunting will die a horrible death." The system. Wei Bai rubbed its pig head. You think the strategy is that simple? Xie Yunting's personality is like that. A man who rebelled without a king or father. Can love poems be eaten? She saw clearly that Xie Yunting's personality was rebellious. If she was soft and flattering, he would definitely find her an eyesore. After all, a man's desire for power was a disease that needed to be cured. The more she acted up, the more he wanted to beat her. The more she acted tough and fearless, the more he would respect her. This back and forth, it would definitely lengthen her life. Everyone else was asking for it. This man? Wei couldn't help but sigh. It's impossible not to abuse him, Unable to keep up with the host's brain speed. The system silently reminded her, the male lead is here. Wei hurriedly touched her hair and adjusted her posture. Seeing that the plum blossoms next to the snowman were blooming well, she rushed over. Then, she put on a bright and sad expression as she looked up at a 45-degree angle. The system. Wei, how is it? Does this pose concern for the country and the people? The system, I can. When Xie Yunting rushed over, he saw Wei Bai standing under the plum blossom tree. The plum blossom was a red plum blossom. She stood under the branches, her small face contrasted like snow. Her eyes were melancholy, but her snow-white skin reflected the light of the flowers, beautiful and flawless. Compared to those rabbits, this kind of little emperor was shockingly beautiful. Xie Yunting suddenly stopped. He stared at her, feeling for the first time. There was actually such a good-looking man in this world. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 0. Wei Bai, look, I'm worried about the country and people, and his favorability increased. The system silently looked at Xie Yunting's wolf-like eyes, and then silently looked at its heaven-defying host. Why did it feel like the male lead finally accepted that he was gay, and that's why his favorability increased? To facilitate your next reading, you can click at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 285. Wei Bai was just about to turn around when she found that Xie Yunting was already standing behind her. Just as she was about to raise her eyebrows and say something sarcastic, he suddenly raised his hand and gently swept it over her head, sweeping off a few petals. This position was much more ambiguous. Wei Bai looked at his dark eyes. Some thoughts ran through her mind, but she couldn't figure out what he was thinking. She could only maintain her image and take a few steps back. Grand Tutor, you sure are leisurely. Why don't you hurry up and deal with the royal family outside the palace? Why do you have time to hang around my shabby house? Xie Yunting suddenly took her hand and rubbed it. Wei Bai, when he was done, he couldn't help but touch her wrist. Wei Bai, then, his fingers slowly caressed her face. It was incomparably smooth and tender, completely different from those rabbits. Wei Bai, then, He frowned and moved his face closer, as if he was facing death calmly. Wei Wei Bai, just as Wei Wei Bai was about to raise her hand and slap him away, Qin Ji Ai suddenly stopped. Gao Jixiang threw himself at Xie Yunting and hugged his thigh. Tai Fu Darren, my family's master is only a child. You have a high position. What do you want? Just let her go. The old eunuch's tears flowed down his cheeks. This damned shameless cut-sleeve had actually set his sights on his young master. There was no justice in this world. Xie Yunting kicked him. The delicate and pretty youth came closer, making him unbearably nauseous. When the old eunuch hugged him, he got goosebumps. After kicking Gao Jixiang away, he turned around and saw that Wei Wei Bai was at a loss. She seemed unable to understand what his actions meant. Indeed, she had always been baring her fangs and brandishing her claws. In fact, she was still young, tender, and innocent. Wei Wei Bai's expression darkened. Why are you touching me? Could it be that you're choosing which part to cut? Xie Yunting, under her clear and sharp eyes, felt somewhat guilty. He actually wanted to see if he would be disgusted. The more he touched it, the more comfortable it felt. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 5. Wei Wei Bai, this increase in favorability is beyond my expectations. Something is wrong. Xie Yunting tidied up his deranged thoughts and resumed his indifferent appearance. Aren't we going to the snow hunt in a few days? I came to ask His Majesty if his body can take it. Why don't I go in your place? Wei Wei Bai glanced at him and sneered. Gee, give me my bow. Gao Jixiang looked at her worriedly, but he still went to get the bow. Wei Wei Bai had taken a bow and arrow before. The body of the original owner was very weak, but since she was young, she had learned to ride a bow and arrow for a while. You're learning pretty well, but you don't have the stamina to last long. Therefore, he could still act cool for a while. Wei Wei Bai pulled the bowstring straight away. Her posture was perfect, and her eyes were sharp and bright. At this moment, she was no longer as delicate as a flower. Instead, she had an unstoppable aura. Tut! The arrow flew out and pierced into the trunk of the plum tree, causing the flowers to fall to the ground. She turned around and gave him a provocative smile. Her sly smile was full of vitality. How is it? Do you think Shen can't do it? Her voice was still soft and pleasant to hear, but her words were aggressive. A gust of wind blew, and those fallen flowers flew over. She stood among the flowers, unexpectedly more beautiful than the flowers. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 10. Wei Wei Bai listened to the notification of the favorability and looked at Xie Yunting's warm eyes. This favorability increase was a bit strange. Xie Yunting suddenly walked over, his voice gentle. This official didn't know that His Majesty had such nimble movements. Wei Wei Bai looked at him with a strange expression. This guy couldn't be so easily bent, right? But this favorability increase, if he wasn't bent, how could it increase so quickly? Suddenly, Xie Yunting's footsteps paused. He looked at the snowman. Xie Yunting will not die a good death. Xie Yunting, ding! The male lead's favorability has increased by 5, decreased by 5. What happened to the more you resist, the higher the favorability? This damn bent man didn't play according to the rules. Slash. Chapter 286. Wei Wei Bai's expression changed. Slagstim, this guy isn't gay, right? This world was actually easier than the other worlds, only -20. Xie Yunting didn't have any enmity with her, so there was a huge pit waiting for her here. He was gay. The system flipped through the data from beginning to end. No, the data didn't say, Wei Wei Bai, or did he find out I'm a woman? The system scanned the male lead from head to toe. No, he thinks you're a man. Wei Wei Bai, straight men can't be turned gay. Only gay men can be turned gay. So Xie Yunting is secretly gay. Xie Yunting saw that Wei Wei Bai seemed to be a bit distracted, so he couldn't help but walk over and rub her hand. His eyes still held a trace of heat, his tone indifferent. The Emperor's hand is soft and boneless, but it doesn't seem like it would hold a bow or an arrow. Wei Wei Bai, wrong, your uncle. He's no longer secretly gay. He's even openly gay. What normal man would hold another man's hand tightly and then have a look of enjoyment on his face? Just how many favorability points did he have? And he was already drooling over this idiot. He was so bent that he couldn't be turned back. Wei Bai tried to pull back her hand, but found that the other was too strong. She couldn't pull it back. She raised an eyebrow. Tai Fu wants to compare arm strength with Shin? These naive words completely disregarded his caressing and groping actions. Xie Yunting's eyes darkened. This official just feels that the Emperor's archery is not standard enough. Do you want this official to help you correct it? Wei Bai, correct? Touching my hand isn't enough. Even my body isn't spared. She couldn't help but tighten her grip on the bow. She suddenly shook off his hand, turned around, and took several steps back. She took an arrow from the quiver, knocked the bowstring, and pointed it at Xie Yunting. Tai Fu, is this posture standard enough? Her eyes were burning, completely unafraid of his deterrence. She clearly had no regard for life or death. Xie Yunting stood in place, the heat in his eyes turning cold. When he saw the words on the snowman that said she wished he could die, he regained his rationality. In the end, this little emperor was just a stepping stone for him to ascend the throne. Could it be that this little emperor had really given him a goo? He actually felt pity for a mere petal. Could it be that this little emperor had really given him a goo? Xie Yunting was just about to take a few steps forward to seize the bow in her hand. Wei Bai suddenly loosened her grip on the bow and directly stuffed the bow and arrows into Gao Jixiang's hands. All right, I'm tired. If there's nothing else, you can leave. His casual attitude made it seem like he really thought that his identity was still the same as before, a noble descendant of a dragon. Xie Yunting only felt like he was suffocating. His voice suppressed his anger. I thought the Emperor couldn't wait to kill me. Just now, if she had been a little more ruthless, that arrow could have hurt him. Wei Bai had already turned around to leave, but when she heard his words, her footsteps paused. Xie Yunting saw that her entire back was stiff, and her fingers were clenched into fists, as if she was enduring something. Suddenly she turned around, her eyes red. It didn't seem like she was angry, but more like she was grief-stricken. Couldn't wait to kill you? No, I wish I had never seen you. Finished speaking, she didn't look back and left. Xie Yunting stood in place. This sentence made his brain sluggish for a moment. She had never seen him before. Also, the person she worshipped had ruined everything for her, and wanted to trample her under his feet to complete his own hegemony. She really couldn't wait to see him. After Xie Yunting thought it through, he sneered. Since ancient times, the winner was king and the loser was in the wrong. What was the use of the weak blaming the strong? The loser deserved to be trampled under the soles of others' feet. Xie Yunting thought this, but he didn't know why his heart was so stifled. Download. Chapter 287. Returning to his residence, he began to angrily review the memorials. The little emperor was now almost the same as the emperor, almost unable to touch power. These things that should have been done by her were all done by him. And even if he gave it to her, with her arrogant and mediocre temperament, what good suggestions could she give? Thinking like this, he couldn't help but think of just now, her confident and noble appearance when she pulled the bow and shot the arrow. It really was a cluster of red plum blossoms, covered by her smile. Xie Yunting thought about it, and couldn't think of anyone who could compare to the little emperor. He couldn't help but pinch his fingers. His fingertips seemed to retain the softness of her fingers. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 10. Wei Bai, who was eating in the palace. The mentally retarded bent man. This favorability going up and down was really inexplicable. She didn't understand the otaku's favorability. She didn't understand the bent man's favorability even more. As a result, she saw Xie Binan unexpectedly standing at the entrance of the palace, swaggering in. Halfway through the meal, she almost choked to death. Even if they lived in the same palace, they were separated by several palaces. How could he come and go so many times in one day? Xie Yunting was followed by a line of eunuchs and maids. He looked straight ahead. This official has come to ask the emperor to review the memorials. Wei Bai unhurriedly stuffed a mouthful of food into her mouth, indifferently saying, "Isn't this Tai Fu's matter?" Xie Yunting saw that the food on her table was already cold. and he didn't see a maid next to her with a heater. This palace was so cold, there wasn't a bit of heat. Although Wei Wei Bai was stubbornly holding on, her face was pale, as if she was cold. Xie Yunting's face darkened. Someone come? The eunuch who followed him quickly came over. Tai Fu, what orders do you have? Xie Yunting's eyes were cold. What's wrong with this palace? There's no charcoal to warm it, no floor heating. Who is the worst? The eunuch immediately knelt down. Grand Tutor, didn't you order for the palace to let it do as it pleases and for us to ignore it? Who doesn't know that the little emperor's body is not good and the winter is cold? As long as the little emperor is not given enough firewood, let her freeze. After a long time, he would catch a cold. If he played any tricks, the little emperor would die by himself. This would prevent the Grand Tutor from being accused of murdering the last emperor of the previous dynasty when he ascended the throne. When Wei Wei Bai heard this, she looked at Xie Yunting with ridicule. She smiled coldly. All right, I don't know what you're thinking. Why do you have to go through so much trouble? If you want me to die, just push me into the ice pool outside. It'll save you a lot of trouble and won't dirty the place. When Xie Yunting heard this, his heart felt even more stifled. He kicked the eunuch away. Go and give the order. Tidy up the palace for me, and the food must be up to standard. If you bunch of servants don't have eyes, then don't even have eyes. The eunuchs immediately agreed and hurriedly left to handle the matter. Xie Yunting had come here several times before, but he had always been in a hurry, so he hadn't thought that such a cold day would be so unbearable. He didn't like this little emperor, and the people around him were even more disdainful. So she actually lived to the point where she didn't even have a charcoal fire in winter. Even if she was a stepping stone for him, she shouldn't let the servants trample on her like this. Xie Yunting thought of when he was a child. He was ruined by the mistress of the house until he had no winter clothes to wear and could only huddle in the kitchen to keep warm. That was really worse than a dog. And the little emperor had lived in luxury for so many years, her temperament had long since been raised. When he came, what was the difference between her days and when he was a child? Wei Wei Bai watched as Xie Yunting turned from guest to host, making the palace as warm as spring and having people change the food. She looked at him with a strange expression in her eyes. Then she was even more certain that Xie Yunting was bent. Crossing system, male god, come here. / crossing system, male god, come here. 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 Chapter 288. Originally, she wanted to walk the path of worrying about the country and the people, a righteous and awe-inspiring persona. But if Xie Yunting's sexual orientation was different, then this persona wouldn't work. She had to walk the gay path. She also had a gay two-way crush on him. Wei Wei Bai's mind turned, and her attitude naturally changed. When Xie Yunting took the memorial, her fingers accidentally touched his fingertips. She couldn't help but blush slightly. Although her eyes were stubborn, there was a trace of pain in them. Xie Yunting's fingers also trembled. For a moment, he suspected that he had seen wrong. When he looked carefully, he found that Wei Wei Bai had her head down, flipping through the memorial, as if that trace of affection just now was just a figment of his imagination. Xie Yunting felt his heart clench. He couldn't say what he felt, but Bai Wei Wei suddenly handed over the memorial and leaned close to him. Look at this person, flattering you so much. You actually have a big heart. This kind of villain actually allowing him to be such a big official. Xie Yunting only felt that his nose was filled with that kind of faintly discernible fragrance. He couldn't help but hold his breath, just as he was about to calmly stand back to avoid being aroused again. She just happened to turn her head, and the two people's lips touched. With a light sweep, her soft and cold lips unexpectedly had a trace of sweetness. Wei Wei Bai immediately threw away the memorial and stepped back several steps. She reached out to cover her mouth, her cheeks red, and her eyes watery as she stared at him. This appearance was simply a young girl yearning for love, the appearance of a shy youth. Xie Yunting's breathing became chaotic. Could it be that the little emperor didn't just worship him? She secretly loved him? Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 15. Wei Wei Bai let out a sigh of relief. She couldn't help but say to the system, "It seems that worrying about the country and the people's love and hate won't work. There's still a market for you, and I love each other." As soon as she showed her adoration, her favorability rose. The system suddenly gave a ding. "Congratulations to the host for opening a side mission. Please complete the mission of hating you, hating you, hating you to death. Do you accept?" 1 yes, 2 yes, 3 yes, I accept. Wei Wei Bai. What the hell? What kind of mission is that? Also, what the hell was that option? Where was the reject option? Before she could complain, the system announced that it was done. 1 second has passed. The host has accepted the side mission. If you fail the mission, the heavens will strike you with 5 bolts of lightning. Over. Wei Wei Bai. Damn. How is this any different from forced acceptance? The system added, "This mission is to make sure that when your favorability reaches 100, you can't show any signs of love for the male lead." Wei Wei Bai. Who would fall in love with someone who hates them to death? Are you a masochist? And it was clear that Xie Yunting preferred others to love him, and love him to death. If she didn't show that she loved him to death, how could he be moved? The system said, 5 thunderstrike from heaven. Wei Wei Bai. This broken system, why didn't it self-destruct and die earlier? Xie Yunting's thoughts were also meticulous. Thinking of the little emperor's various actions, he was 50 to 60% sure. She did care about him, and she also had those thoughts for him. When he thought of this, his mood unexpectedly brightened. Xie Yunting saw that she was still covering her mouth and couldn't help but tease. Is the emperor reminiscing about that kiss? These words were very impetuous, but also very intimate. The system immediately reminded, the male lead thinks you love him. If he has this thought more than 5 times, the side mission will be considered a failure. Wei Wei Bai really wanted to spit out blood on the system's face. She immediately put down her hand, the blush on her face disappearing, the affection in her eyes shattered. Then she looked at him blankly. What kiss? Xie Yunting thought she was shy and refused to admit it. He was just about to say something. Wei Wei Bai calmly said, "You said I accidentally brushed against your lips?" Sure enough, people are evil, and their breath stinks. I couldn't help but cover my nose. Xie Yunting, ding. The male lead's favorability has decreased by 5. Remaining favorability is 10. Transmigration system, male god, come here. 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 Chapter 289. Wei Wei Bai looked at the falling favorability.
Slag stem.
Slag stem, question mark. Wei Wei Bai. I hate you, hate you, hate you to death. Slag stem. Xie Yunting didn't bring the memorials with good intentions. Apart from the flattery, the rest of the memorials were state affairs. The new year was coming, and the evaluation of officials was a troublesome matter. The border had been plundered by the Xiongnu, which was also a big problem. The national treasury was empty, and there were forces outside the palace eyeing it covetously. It was a big problem. For this matter, if one's ability was mediocre, just looking at it would make one's legs go soft. How could one have a good idea? And the little emperor's temperament was known to all. Her ability was mediocre, and she had no achievements. If she hadn't been born in the main palace, the position of crown prince wouldn't have been hers. And Xie Yunting didn't know why, but he wanted to use these memorials to make things difficult for her. Perhaps he wanted her to know that the position of emperor was not something she was qualified for, and that she should give up as soon as possible. Wei Wei Bai took the memorials and the brush, her expression indifferent. Humph, that old man Minister of Revenue is crying poverty again. Does he think we don't know what he's thinking? He's afraid that the Ministry of War's budget for next year is too big, so he said in advance that the national treasury is empty. If something happens, he won't have to take responsibility. Xie Yunting raised his eyebrows and looked at her. He saw that she had already finished reviewing the Ministry of Revenue's memorials. He took a look and found that not only had the Ministry of Revenue's budget been written, but she had also changed the Ministry of Revenue's accounting method. His eyes flashed with a trace of shock. The Ministry of War is a group of idiots. The border has already been plundered several times, and they still have time for internal strife. Send an army supervisor to rectify it. Wei Wei Bai also finished reviewing the Ministry of War's memorials. Her speed was so fast that Xie Yunting felt it was inconceivable. What is a marriage alliance thing? Wei Wei Bai suddenly took a memorial and angrily roared at Xie Yunting. Xie Yunting looked up and saw the flames of anger burning in her eyes. Her beauty was suppressed by his cold aura. How was this like the mediocre crown prince, the cowardly puppet emperor? He couldn't help but answer, the Xiongnu Chanyu wants to marry the princess, so... Wei Wei Bai looked at him with eyes as sharp as knives, interrupting him, so you agreed. Xie Yunting, is that all you've got? These words, this aura, it was as if he was just a lowly subject. But she was still a high and mighty emperor who had never experienced a palace coup. But for a moment, Xie Yunting forgot how much power he had now. He was actually oppressed by her to the point where he couldn't even open his mouth to retort. She sneered and knocked on the memorial. You actually agreed to such a shameful thing as a political marriage. So what if the national treasury is empty? So what if there is internal strife because of the palace coup? Indeed, the internal strife had consumed too much of his energy. That was why he wanted to use the marriage alliance to stall for time, so that he could deal with those external forces. He only came to attack the Xiongnu after successfully sitting on the throne. But under Wei Wei Bai's cold condemning eyes, he couldn't say a single one of these reasons. Wei Wei Bai threw the memorial into his arms. I thought Tai Fu was amazing, able to govern the country in an orderly manner. It turns out you're just an idiot who uses innocent women in exchange for peace. Sending a princess of golden branches and jade leaves to the Great Wall. It's estimated that she won't live for more than a few years. Xie Yunting was thrown by her memorial, unexpectedly sobering up. It's rumored that when the emperor was the crown prince, his talent was mediocre and his decision-making was slow. It seems that this rumor is not credible. /T Chapter 290. Even he had to spend a lot of effort to make decisions on these important matters. But when the little emperor made decisions, she was faster than him, and the way she solved them was similar to his. How was this mediocre talent? This was simply the appearance of a wise ruler. When Wei Wei Bai heard this, she suddenly felt a little dispirited. She smiled coldly. If I didn't act mediocre, would Xu Fei spare me? Xie Yunting. So you deliberately acted clumsy? Wei Wei Bai's eyes didn't have a trace of warmth. Why do you think my body is so weak? It was forced out by Xu Fei's bowl of poison. My father clearly knew it was Xu Fei who did it, but he still covered for her. Xie Yunting didn't think that she would have suffered this. He saw that her eyes were sharp, and her temperament was cold. It seemed that thinking of the past made her feel unbearable pain. Wei Wei Bai smiled sorrowfully. So what if I was born from the main palace? How could I not understand my father's thoughts? He only saw Xu Fei, and only saw my brother who was born 2 months before me. When I was young, I didn't understand, and acted too well. Xu Fei's bowl of poison ruined my health. When she said this, her eyes couldn't help but turn red. I knew at that time that I was just a shield. My father blocked me in front of my brother, and then when I grew up, he dethroned me from the position of crown prince and gave the throne to my brother. When Wei Wei Bai said this, she finally couldn't suppress the painful sobs in her throat. She suddenly turned around, her body trembling. Xie Yunting, I pretended to be mediocre for so many years, not to become a waste, but to overthrow Xu Fei and smoothly take the throne. Xie Yunting didn't think that the little emperor's mediocrity was all a pretense. She pretended too well, but when he thought of how she was clearly full of talent, but was oppressed, that kind of feeling, he didn't know how painful it was. Wei Wei Bai's voice was tired. As a result, after so many years of pretending, all my hopes were shattered by you. Xie Yunting heard the despair in her voice. He thought of himself. If it was her, waiting for so many years for the fruit to be picked, he would probably vomit blood. Wei Wei Bai suddenly said, I'm tired, you can go. Xie Yunting looked at the scattered memorials. tidied them up, and then said, "Does the emperor not want to read them?" Wei Wei Bai turned her back to him and laughed mockingly. "Do you think I can't see through your tricks? What's the use of reading it? So what if you've read it? If I say that you're not allowed to marry, would you still be willing to listen to me?" Xia Yunting only felt bitterness in his mouth. Indeed, a political marriage was the most beneficial to him. After all, he didn't care whether the princess would die or not, as long as his army could recuperate. So what if 10 princesses died? But these dark words, in front of Wei Wei Bai's proud and unyielding attitude, actually seemed exceptionally small and wretched. Wasn't he here to humiliate her as well? He thought that she was mediocre, but he didn't expect that she was full of talent and pride. Xia Yunting only felt all kinds of emotions churning together, almost unable to stand. He couldn't help but soften his tone. "Then this official will take his leave." This was the first time he bowed his proud head to her. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 15. Wei Wei Bai didn't respond. She just stood there, not looking back at him. Xia Yunting walked out the door and couldn't help but look at her. But he found that she was holding a pin in her hand, looking at him with sad eyes. Then he thought of how she was in high spirits when she was reading the memorials. She was clearly a genius who could spread her wings and fly. His arrival had broken her wings, making her talent turn to dust once again. Transmigration system, male god, come here. Transmigration system, male god, come here. / transmigration system, male god, come here. Transmigration system, male god, come here. / transmigration system, male god, come here. Chapter 291. Xia Yunting suddenly didn't dare to continue thinking. He turned and left, his footsteps hurried. But he took it for granted that the little emperor was mediocre, and that it was natural for him to succeed. But he began to waver. Wei Wei Bai sorrowfully looked at the pin. "Trash system, you're deliberately forcing me onto the road to death. Originally, I could have just eaten my sweet biscuits and been a useless emperor waiting for death. Then I could have leisurely used love and beauty to influence Xia Yunting. I could have acted out a series of secret love in the palace, easily obtaining 100 points of favorability. The system didn't dare to say anything. In the end, you're forcing me to give up my beauty and let me use my talent to conquer him." System, talent, Wei Wei Bai touched her face. To make Xia Yunting's favorability rise, besides loving him, is to be more awesome than him, more valiant than him, more talented than him. He's convinced, so naturally his favorability rises. But this road is too tiring. Pretending to be naive and sweet was a completely different level of labor intensity from pretending to be high and mighty. The former was sitting in an air-conditioned room, eating and waiting to die. The latter was moving bricks in a construction site under the scorching sun of 40 degrees Celsius. The system couldn't help but ask, "Why do you keep touching your face? Is it itchy?" Wei Wei Bai tenderly touched her face. "No, it's just that I can't use my beauty to seduce people, and I'm not used to it. I'm so beautiful. Why do I need that sour talent?" System. The host's skin was so thick, how could it think she was itchy? Xia Yunting was probably stunned by her talent and didn't bother her. Wei Wei Bai wasn't in a hurry. She ate and drank, waiting for the time to come. On the morning of the snow hunt, Wei Wei Bai was urged to get up early by Gao Jixiang. Then she put on hunting clothes and a fox fur cloak. Someone had already come to greet her outside. It was Xia Yunting. He stood in the snow outside the door, looked up, and saw Wei Wei Bai walking over. Although her figure was petite, her posture was incomparably tall and straight. Every movement of hers had the temperament of a member of the imperial family. Her elegance was completely natural. When she saw him, her eyes were cold and emotionless. "I'll have to trouble Grand Tutor to pick me up. Today's hunting is just a formality. I'll have to trouble Grand Tutor to take care of the rest." His words were neither cold nor warm, polite and distant. Xia Yunting thought that these past few days, he couldn't eat or sleep well. She tossed and turned in bed at night, thinking of the little emperor's magnificent appearance. There had never been anyone who could make him so worried, but his subordinates came to report. The little emperor was not worried about his fate at all. She slept soundly and ate well. He did not allow others to mistreat her, but she was very carefree. Xia Yunting pursed his lips, his face gloomy. Then I asked the emperor to get on the carriage. However, Wei Bai saw the horse beside them. No need. Why would a man get into a carriage? He should ride a horse. Wei Bai knew how to ride a horse, and this body also knew how to ride a horse, so she stepped on the stirrup and got on the horse. His movements were smooth and beautiful. Then she took the horsewhip. With a flick of the whip, she turned around and rushed towards the palace gates. Xia Yunting clearly knew that she couldn't run away, but he didn't know why. But when he saw her leave without any reluctance, his heart was gripped. Uneasiness welled up. He didn't think too much. He hurriedly got on the horse and chased after her. Chasing out of the palace gates, he watched her constantly moving back. He didn't know why, but he had the illusion that he would never be able to catch up. Just as he was about to shout for the others to stop her, Wei Bai suddenly pulled on the horse's head and stopped. In the distance, the sun had just risen. Xia Yunting. Wei Bai turned around and suddenly called him with a smile. Xia Yunting had already come to her side and was about to say something, but she pointed the horsewhip forward. Look, isn't this landscape beautiful? He looked up. The rays of light were like gold sprinkling outside the palace, the continuous houses, the distant mountains. Beautiful was beautiful, but the smile in her eyes was even more beautiful than this. Xia Yunting's eyes darkened. Chapter 292. But Wei didn't know about his darkness. She said, "This country is in your hands. Jin knows that you are talented and have a heart full of hot blood. If someone else came to snatch this country, Jin might risk his life to fight." These words weighed 1,000 caddies. If it was before, Xia Yunting might have ridiculed her for overestimating herself. But seeing her hidden talent, he found that the little emperor was the same kind of person as him. She didn't lack talent. Such a person really did have the confidence to say such things. Wei Bai's tone was very serious. "Because it is you, we are willing to give up, because we know you will be a good emperor. My father is muddle-headed and ordinary, unworthy of being an emperor. And because imperial concubine Shu has caused chaos in the court, the people have no way to make a living, and the officials are corrupt. To change this situation, we must reform with iron and blood." Xia Yunting stared at her. Her thoughts happened to coincide with his. "We thought that after we became emperor, we would put you in an important position and let you become the one to reform." Wei Bai's tone was bitter. "I didn't expect you to be more capable than we thought." "Well, as long as the people are not bitter, it doesn't matter who sits on the throne." Xia Yunting only felt that her words pierced his heart and peeled open the door to his heart. He didn't expect that the little emperor's mind would be so broad. As long as the people were good, it didn't matter if she sacrificed herself. "So, don't let me down." Wei Bai smiled again, her eyes bright like the beautiful sun. She whipped the horse and suddenly turned away. Her words came from far away. "After you become emperor, you will be a wise ruler. My days of worshipping you will not be in vain." Xia Yunting stood in place, stupefied. The guards of honor and the escort team caught up, waking him up. Xia Yunting saw that the little emperor had already left him far behind. He impatiently urged the horse's belly to catch up. At this moment, he didn't know why his heart was beating so fast. It was like it was going to jump out of his chest. The words of the little emperor kept repeating in his mind. After he succeeded in forcing the emperor to abdicate, other than those close to him, who didn't angrily curse him as a thief who stole the country. However, she worshipped him and wanted to put him in an important position. She even acknowledged that he would be a good emperor. These expectations were actually able to warm his heart and melt it. No matter how much flattery there was, it couldn't compare to her few words. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 20. When Wei Bai heard the reminder, she couldn't help but sigh. It's not easy. This inferiority man's favorability has finally increased. The system. Inferiority man? Wei Bai sighed again. When he was young, he was abused and didn't have anything to eat or drink. He's afraid of being poor. Now that he's rich, He likes to listen to flattering words. Look, just a few words of flattery makes him happy. She sighed and concluded, that's why people need to be pampered. Look at me. I've been pampered since I was young. I have a broad vision. I won't be swayed by a few words of praise. The system. Host, you're absolutely right. You're so beautiful, smart, cute, and unique. How can you be swayed by a few words of praise? When Wei Wei Bai heard this, she was overjoyed. So you can see my good points. Then I won't care about how you were blind and deaf in the past. When the system heard this, it went against its conscience and said, Host, you're the most beautiful. Wei Wei Bai held her face and giggled. My beloved all. If you want snacks or eye drops, you can buy them on credit. You can spend your life points however you want. Damn, what happened to being unswayed by a broad vision? This was faster than a dog's tail wagging. The download text is at https://www.sashu.com/the. Chapter 293. The snow hunt was just a large year-end activity for the royal family. Wei Wei Bai rode a horse and shot a wild boar, which was considered the start. Then she sat down and watched as the civil and military officials happily chased after their prey like a husky that had been released from its leash. Sitting for a long time was especially boring, and her body was weak, so she actually began to doze off. Xie Yunting returned with several dead foxes and ordered people to skin them. He saw the little emperor wearing fox fur clothes, especially cute and noble, so he couldn't help but hunt the foxes. When he finished ordering, he saw the little emperor sitting in the chair asleep. That pink face, because of the burning charcoal, was dyed red, so beautiful that it made his throat tighten. That strange burning feeling came up again. Xie Yunting had never been the kind of person who liked to escape, so he didn't escape, and instead moved closer to her. His fingers couldn't help but touch her face. This smooth and tender feeling made his eyes very deep. His hands slowly trailed down her neck, moving down inch by inch. There was no feeling of disgust at all, but the burning of his body was even more obvious. Suddenly, she seemed to be disturbed. She opened her eyes, her expression confused. Her lips slightly parted, her voice soft and seductive. Tai Fu. Xie Yunting discovered that he had done something absurd. He let go of his hand like he had been electrocuted and immediately retreated several steps, his breathing disorderly. Then he turned and left. Wei Wei Bai touched her neck. Just now, she thought Xie Yunting was going to strangle her. She was scared witless for a good while, and Xie Yunting, who had walked far away, suddenly punched a tree. Crazy. This Bai Wei is simply a scourge. He clearly felt disgusted by any man. Why was it that when it came to her, his body would react every time? Xie Yunting's eyes were malicious and cold. Originally, she should have been his stepping stone, but now it seemed that she was more and more like a stumbling block that could affect him. Tai Fu, as you expected. Zhao Wang is leading the army to hide in the mountains outside the hunting grounds. Xie Yunting turned around and saw that it was his trusted imperial bodyguard reporting. King Zhao was the little emperor's uncle. Originally, the throne had nothing to do with this prince, but he succeeded in forcing the emperor to abdicate, and also took the young emperor as a puppet, so these people could not remain calm. As long as he killed the little emperor and then killed him, the throne would naturally fall into the hands of King Zhao. And in today's snow hunt, the little emperor was Xie Yunting's bait to lure Zhao Wang. After killing King Zhao, the opposing forces outside the palace would be reduced by more than half. However, using her as bait would be dangerous. Xie Yunting thought of the little emperor dying under the arrow, and his heart felt like it was being pricked by a needle, so painful that he couldn't pull it out. The more pain he felt, the colder his eyes became. She couldn't let her affect him anymore. Follow the original plan. When he said this, his face was hidden in the shadows. His expression was terrifyingly cold. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 25. Wei Wei Bai, who was yawning and eating snacks, raised her eyebrows when she heard the reminder. What was this Xie Yunting thinking? She didn't do anything to increase his favorability. This increase in favorability was definitely not a good sign. The snow hunt was successfully completed, and Wei Wei Bai gave a final speech. She also rewarded the officials who killed the most prey, and then patted her butt and prepared to return to the palace. Xia Yunting walked over. Is the emperor still riding back to the palace? Wei Wei Bai, only a fool would ride a horse? Of course it's more comfortable. Didn't you say that riding a horse is more like a man? Wei Wei Bai saw her carriage and was about to jump in. Xia Yunting suddenly reached out and took her hand. Emperor, be careful of the bumps. Her footsteps paused, and she looked back at him, her eyes clear and soft. Download the https://www.sashu.com/ Download the full article. https://www.sashu.com. Download the full article. https://www.sashu.com. Download the full article. https://m.sashu.com/. Chapter 294. You can search Transmigration System. Prince Charming, you come to Sashu. Com in Baidu to find the. Xia Yunting suddenly lowered his head, not daring to look at her. Wei Wei Bai smiled. You're like this, I almost forget I'm just a prisoner. If only we were a pair of harmonious monarch and minister. Saying this, she entered the carriage. Xia Yunting almost wanted to pull her out of the carriage, not letting her be the bait. But when his fingers were halfway out, he coldly turned around. This kind of woman's benevolence must be eradicated. After Wei Wei Bai got in the carriage, she said to the system, I always feel like that guy Xia Yunting's eyes are not right. System, what eyes? Wei Wei Bai thoughtfully said, the eyes of a resentful woman parting in life and death. System, why is the host always able to understand the emotions in other people's eyes? It looks like it's just a light, sensitive glass body. Wei Wei Bai's intuition was right. The carriage had just passed through the mountain path when suddenly there were sounds of fighting and killing all around. She pulled open the curtain of the carriage to look. Xia Yunting was far behind, not following at all. She and the guard of honor were surrounded. Hundreds of assassins dressed in the same color as the trees, their swords falling like chopping vegetables and melons, chopping down the soldiers on her side. Wei Wei Bai, that trash Xia, he's not a man. He actually used me as bait to hang his enemies. System. Ah, that head flew out, that leg was cut off, blood gushing out. Host, you seem to be finished. Wei Wei Bai dug her ear, disdainfully. A country bumpkin who hasn't seen the big scene. Have you seen the Spring Festival? Have you seen the supermarket snatching salt? These people are a piece of cake. Just as she finished speaking, an arrow flew in, brushing past her ear. In the distance, Xia Yunting was pulling in the net. Seeing the arrow shoot into the little emperor's carriage, his heart suddenly jumped. He suddenly shouted, is the encirclement complete? The little emperor had attracted all of Zhao Wang's people. Xia Yunting began to surround this group of hostile forces, and the little emperor was facing death at any time. A guard ran over. Grand Tutor, it's almost done. Xia Yunting clenched his teeth, his chest heaving up and down a few times. The people around the little emperor were about to be killed. He suddenly said fiercely, begin the encirclement and annihilation immediately. The guard hesitated but still said, yes. Just as he finished speaking, the guard's expression suddenly changed, and the sharp blade in his hand suddenly stabbed forward. Xia Yunting's mind was in chaos, but he still sensed that something was wrong behind him. His body suddenly dodged, and the blade that should have pierced a vital point actually stabbed into his left waist. With a backhand chop, he killed the guard. Only then did the people around him exclaim, Grand Tutor. Xia Yunting's pupils shrank. Damn it, a spy actually infiltrated. Break out. This guard was in charge of communication. If the person in charge of communication had betrayed them, then the troops he had arranged might not have been able to complete the mission. But it was too late. King Zhao's men had all counterattacked, abandoning their mission to kill the little emperor and rushing to kill Xia Yunting. For a time, fighting broke out everywhere. Corpses were everywhere. Xia Yunting killed a lot of people, but his wounds began to blur his vision. There were still a lot of people who wanted to kill him. In the end, the blade in his hand was bent, and he had to give up. He didn't expect that he would die from the betrayal of a spy. He couldn't help but laugh mockingly. In his blurred vision, a white horse suddenly broke through the obstacles. The horse galloped towards him, and the person on the horse was like a god. Xia Yunting grabbed Jin's hand. Xia Yunting looked up, only to see her picturesque face, blood-stained cheeks, and clear eyes reflecting him. It was like she was his savior. His heart was heavily knocked. Xia Yunting suddenly reached out, grabbing her outstretched hand. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 30. 35. / Download. Chapter 295. After mounting the horse, Wei Wei pulled on the reins. Her eyes were sharp, and her momentum was like a rainbow as she urged the horse to rush to the side of the cliff. Everyone rushed over, shouting to beat and kill them, wanting to knock them off their horses. Wei Wei didn't care, leaving her back to Xia Yunting. Xia Yunting wielded his curved long sword, parrying the countless arrows. Suddenly, an assassin on horseback caught up, the broadsword in his hand viciously chopping down at Wei Wei. Xia Yunting's eyes narrowed. Without thinking, he threw the sword in his hand, piercing the assassin's heart. Now he even lost his weapon, and they were surrounded by the enemy. There was no way they could wait for help. Xia Yunting had lost too much blood. He dizzily rested his head on her shoulder. His hand held her waist, the two of them tightly pressed together, soft and warm, like clouds and brocade. He didn't have this kind of thought for the little emperor when he was about to die. He was simply bewitched. By Wei, his tone was weak. Wei Bai's eyes were incomparably focused. Her life was hanging on her shoulders. How could she pay attention to Xia Yunting's thoughts? She hummed in acknowledgement. I didn't think the two of us would die together in the end, Xia Yunting said softly. Wei Bai finally heard what the man behind her said. Haven't you heard of a saying? Wei Bai suddenly said in a loud voice. Xia Yunting opened his eyes. In front of him was the cliff. Across the cliff, there was a flat mountain road. Suddenly, Wei Bai leaned over and clamped down on the horse's belly, her entire body in a diving position. With a neigh, the horse rushed over, jumped up, and jumped down the cliff. In the whistling wind, Wei Bai's voice also drilled into his ears. A scourge lives for 1,000 years. How could you die so easily? As soon as these words fell, the horse unexpectedly leaped over the cliff and fell into the opposite path. At the same time, Wei Bai heard the system's notification. Host activated life subsistence allowance, deducting 5 days of life. It could also be used in all kinds of dangerous situations. For example, if you ride a horse to jump off a cliff, it will do its best to ensure that you succeed in surviving. At the same time, it also improved her ability to jump over the cliff much more smoothly than others. The pursuing assassins all stopped in their tracks. A few of them were too late and directly rolled to the bottom of the cliff. Xia Yunting was shocked. He stared at her with wide eyes. She was actually able to ride a horse and leap over the cliff. It was not only skill, but also courage. Wei Bai sensed his gaze and couldn't help but smile brightly. Then he patted his horse, bringing Xia Yunting along as he charged into the mountain road, disappearing into the dense forest. Xia Yunting, however, was dazzled by her smile, and his heart began to beat wildly. His vision turned black and he hugged her even more tightly, worried that she would abandon him. Wei Bai was almost suffocated by his strength. Let go, Taifu. Xia Yunting's consciousness was getting farther and farther away. His voice was hoarse and muddy. I won't let go. If I let you go, you'll run away. Wei Bai was helpless. Where can I run to? Aren't you holding me in your hands? She said it so coldly and impatiently. However, he was able to hear a trace of ambiguous feelings in her voice. I really want to hold you in my hands. For a lifetime. Ding. The male lead's favorability has increased to 40. The male lead just had 3 seconds of imagining that you like him. This is the second time. There are 3 more side quests to fail. Wei Wei Bai fiercely turned around. She couldn't wait to kick Xie Yunting, this wretched man, off his horse. She was so fierce. He could still imagine that she liked him. How hungry and thirsty would that be? That's why old virgins are the most difficult to deal with. Crossing system. Male god, come here. / crossing system. Male god, come here / crossing system. Male god, come here. Crossing system. Male god, come here. Crossing system. Male god, come here, comma. Chapter 296. Xie Yunting's injury was not light. When he had a high fever, he only felt a pair of weak little hands, wiping his body. His wound was also carefully bandaged. After struggling to wake up several times, he vaguely saw the little emperor's shadow swaying beside him. Only then was he willing to close his eyes again. Because of the high fever, he had a lot of messy dreams. In his dream, his small body was kneeling in the ancestral hall. Those lowly servants from time to time took vines and whipped him a few times. Because he was the son of a concubine, the mistress didn't like him. If he acted smart, he would suffer all kinds of abuse. He lacked food and clothing, was not allowed to study, had to do manual labor, and was bullied by lowly servants. He even had a serious illness, dying. When the time came, he was thrown into the woodshed to die. At that time, he thought that no one in this world would save him. Those officials, emperors, immortals, they were all empty. He expected others to come and save him. In the end, he could only wait for death. If he didn't die, he would work hard to climb to the top, and trample all those who despised him under his feet. The dream was very complicated. He dreamed that he was the top scorer in the high school parade. He was very happy, but his heart was very calm. Not high enough. He didn't stand high enough. His heart was like an abyss. The greater the power, the more he desired. But even if he reached the highest position, he was still not satisfied. What was missing? Xie Yunting was at a loss. Suddenly, someone called him softly. He turned around and saw a petite but straight figure under a cluster of red plum blossoms. He walked over and saw that she was wearing a wedding dress, looking at him with a smile. Xie Yunting was stunned. She slowly took his hand. Tai Fu, Zhen will marry you. Xie Yunting looked at her. It was the little emperor's face, but she was wearing a woman's wedding dress. There was no feeling of being neither fish nor fowl. Instead, it was incomparably stunning. Xie Yunting's voice trembled. Good. As soon as these words came out, his heart was suddenly satisfied. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 45. This reminder woke up Bai Weiwei, who was dozing off to the side. She looked at the feverish Xie Yunting in bewilderment. How did the favorability rise again? The favorability rose so easily. It made her flustered. Xie Yunting couldn't be imagining that kind of nonsense again, right? Just thinking. The system reminded her again. Ding! The male lead dreamt that you like him. This is the third time. The remaining 2 times will be struck by lightning. Weiwei Bai, she couldn't care less about the heavens and the earth. Could she care less about what he dreamed of? This slagstem actually didn't find her pleasing to the eye and wanted to find an excuse to kill her. This day could not. Xie Yunting didn't know how long he slept. When he opened his eyes, he vaguely saw a figure lying next to him. He recalled that when he was in a daze, that pair of small hands had been gently comforting him. That was the little emperor's hand. He recognized it. Xie Yunting's heart. He didn't expect that she would take care of him day and night, and was so tired that she fell asleep beside him. He gently looked over. You've worked hard. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 50. A large, unshaven face came over, revealing large black and yellow teeth. He laughed and said, Gongzi woke up. It wasn't hard at all. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 45. A gentle heart, a warm heart, an increased favorability. They were all scared back by this face. Full text / Download. To facilitate the next reading, you can click at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 297. Xie Yunting's breath was stuck in his chest, almost suffocating himself to death. He grabbed the man with the round face. "Who are you?" "Emperor." "Where's the person who came with me?" Did the little emperor run away? He began to panic. The round face trembled. "Young master, I'm just a woodcutter. Your wife said you were attacked by bandits, so I took you in." Xia Yunting listened, but his mood was still tense. Wife? What wife? Which shameless woman dared to pretend to be his wife? The round face turned bitter. This young master couldn't have been scared silly by the bandits, even forgetting that he had a wife. Xia Yunting didn't have time to chat with this idiot. He pushed him away and staggered to his feet. The house was a thatched hut, simple and unsightly. Xia Yunting looked back and forth. No, the little emperor was gone. She abandoned him and ran away by herself. His heart seemed to have been dug out. He suddenly laughed coldly. Of course she would run. If the little emperor didn't run at this time, she would be a fool. If she was caught by him and returned to the palace, she could only wait for death. It was a matter of course, but Xia Yunting felt so uncomfortable that he wanted to vomit blood. The wound on his waist also began to hurt. He walked a few steps in a daze, then fell to the cold ground. Suddenly, he clenched his fist and slammed it on the ground. Run! It didn't matter where she ran. He had plenty of ways to get her back. Suddenly, the curtain outside the door was lifted. A petite figure came in. Against the light, the figure was faintly discernible. "Xia Yunting, the ground is cold. Why are you sitting here with an injury?" She came in and said worriedly. Xia Yunting looked like he was struck by lightning. He stared blankly at her. She was wearing a woman's cotton dress, and her black hair was tied up with a wooden hairpin. Her white face was not stained with makeup, but it was more beautiful than the flowers outside the window. This is the little emperor's face." The little emperor seemed to think of something. She changed her words. "Husband, are you all right?" "Husband, husband." The words husband echoed in Xia Yunting's mind like the sound of a bell, shaking him to the point of not knowing what to do. Was he still dreaming? He had just dreamed of her marrying him, and then he dreamt of their married life. Xia Yunting blankly looked around. He was used to being poor as a child, leading to his dreams. How could he be so poor? Wei Bai saw that Xia Yunting seemed to be in a daze. She thought that he was too injured and wasn't normal. She bent down and held his hand, trying to pull him up. Xia Yunting's fingers touched the warmth of her fingertips. This clear warmth instantly pulled him back to his senses. Not a dream? Wei Bai pressed him back onto the bed and said to the flat-faced man, "Big brother, thank you very much for your help." Big Pancake Face was embarrassed. "We're all from the same village. What can we do when we encounter a thief? I'll go brew some medicine for your husband." Wei Bai nodded with a smile and watched Pancake Face leave. Not waiting for her to drop her smile, her body was suddenly pulled onto the bed. The world spun. She was already under Xia Yunting's body. "You." Xia Yunting looked at her, bewildered. Wei Bai's face was calm. She didn't say anything. "You're a woman?" Wei Bai frowned and shook her head. Xia Yunting saw her deny it and smiled coldly. "If you're not a woman, what's on your chest?" It was soft and warm. This was clearly a woman's. "Oh, you mean this?" Wei Bai dug around her chest and pulled out 2 large white buns. Then she said helplessly, "There's no other way. There are people chasing us everywhere. 2 men are too big a target. I had to reluctantly pretend to be a woman." Xia Yunting stared blankly at the buns in her hand. Wei Bai saw his greedy eyes and handed him the buns. "Hungry? Here, eat it." Xia Yunting. To TXT. Chapter 298. Xia Yunting looked at her. His eyes flashed with embarrassment, but more of it was annoyance, as well as a deeply hidden struggle. He had just seen her in women's clothing. He thought she had really come out of his dream. The little emperor had been the crown prince for so many years. How could she be a woman? In the palace environment, hiding a woman in men's clothing was impossible. Wei Bai saw his sluggish face and felt that she couldn't hit him too hard. She got up from the bed and stuffed the steamed bun back. Xia Yunting saw her movements and his mouth twitched. Wei Bai didn't care and walked out. She saw that the big brother had finished boiling the medicine. After thanking him, She came in with the medicine. Xia Yunting leaned on the bed, looking at her with deep eyes. Wei Wei Bai sat by the bed, stirred the medicine with a spoon, and then began to feed him the medicine. As she fed him the medicine, she said softly, "Right now, that prince uncle of mine is holding back his energy to hack us to death, so that he can smoothly take the throne." Xia Yunting listened to her words, but his mind had long been scattered. He saw her wearing a coarse cloth skirt, wearing a woman's hairpin, her slender white fingers holding a spoon, so beautiful that it made his heart tremble. Wei Wei Bai put the medicine in his mouth. "So you have to get better quickly. Otherwise, when the pursuers arrive, we really can only die together." Xia Yunting didn't drink the medicine, but looked at her carefully. Wei Wei Bai maintained her feeding position, looking at him expressionlessly. After a long silence, Wei Wei Bai suddenly understood. She put the medicine in her mouth. She frowned at the bitterness. "Okay, it's not poisonous. Drink it quickly." Xia Yunting was really narrow-minded and suspicious. She had to test for poison when feeding him medicine. Xia Yunting's lips tightened. He hesitated, then said, "Why do you want to save me?" Wei Wei Bai's lips and tongue were still bitter. She said impatiently, "You think I want to? Xiaowang isn't even as good as my useless father. He is cruel and ruthless. If Xiaowang gets the throne, the people will be tortured by him into rebellion." Xia Yunting couldn't help but say, "I'm also rebelling." Wei Wei Bai snorted. "How can you be the same? Your rebellion didn't touch the people. If Xiaowang rebelled, he would probably slaughter all the way." The little emperor's evaluation of him had always been so high. Bai Weiwei sighed softly and looked up at him, her eyes focused and serious. "Xia Yunting, between you and King Zhao, I choose you to be emperor." Xia Yunting's expression complicated. He hesitated for a moment before asking, "What about you?" Wei Wei Bai looked at him like an idiot. "Me? Although I keep saying that I'll come and go, because I've been keeping a low profile, I haven't left any useful people behind in these 10 years, and I don't have any military power. When you attacked the palace, I had already failed. Without soldiers or authority, what would she use to fight Xia Yunting?" Xia Yunting was the man who held most of the country's military power in his hands. When Bai Weiwei thought of this, she rudely put the medicine bowl to his mouth. "Hurry up and drink the medicine, B. If it weren't for the fact that you still have the people in your heart and can be a good emperor, I wouldn't have saved you like this." Xia Yunting listened to her. Clearly, it was what he liked to hear. But his mood was rotten. She saved him just to resist Xiaowang. Just because he was more suitable to be emperor than Xiaowang? He knew that his state of mind was not normal, but the little emperor was still like a wild crane, completely unaffected by him. He clenched his fists, depressed. After drinking the medicine, Xia Yunting lay on the bed. The woodcutter went to collect firewood. They were the only ones left in the hut. Wei Wei Bai looked out the window, bored. The sun was setting, casting a halo on her pure white face. Xia Yunting narrowed his eyes at her. His mood was complicated, but he didn't show it on his face. He suddenly said in a cold voice, "I have always been a man of revenge, a man of gratitude. You saved me this time, so I can spare your life." Chapter 299. When Wei Wei Bai heard this, her eyes moved from outside the window to his side. Her eyes were clear and clear. "Spare my life? Do you want me to write an imperial edict to give you the throne, then demote me to a commoner and drive me out of the palace?" When Xia Yunting heard that she wanted to leave the palace, he couldn't suppress his ruthlessness. "Leave the palace? Where are you going?" Wei Wei Bai innocently said, "Didn't you say you would spare my life? Could it be that after I abdicate, I can still be the retired emperor?" Of course, this was impossible. Her identity was already doomed. She would not have a good end. If he was the emperor, she would be the previous emperor. Not dying was a blessing. How could she be the retired emperor? Xia Yunting also thought of this, so he was silent for a moment. He hesitated for a moment, then said softly, "You can change your identity and continue to stay in the palace. You don't know how difficult life is outside. You are used to living a life of luxury. You can't stand the life of a commoner." Wei Wei Bai was puzzled. "Continue to live in the palace, change my identity. A eunuch? Xia Yunting was angry. Who would dare use this identity to humiliate you? Wei Wei Bai teased. Could it be that I can be your concubine? Otherwise, how could I have a proper identity in the harem? When these words came out, Xia Yunting's pupils constricted. He wanted to say something, but facing her open eyes, he didn't dare to say a word. They were both men, and he was her enemy. His heart was full of dirty and shameless thoughts. How could he dare to say it to her? The two were silent for a moment. Xia Yunting's mind was heavy, but he heard Wei Wei Bai sigh. Your wound is too heavy. If the pursuers come, I don't think I can carry you. Xia Yunting looked at her slender figure, thin arms and legs. It really would be difficult to carry him. He took out a signal firework and handed it to Wei Wei Bai. Use this to send a signal. My people will see it and come to the rescue. Wei Wei Bai took it and nodded. This is a good thing. Then she walked to the window with a signal flare in her hand, but she didn't light it. Instead, she looked at him calmly. Xia Yunting became vigilant. Then he heard the little emperor's soft voice, Grand Tutor, you said that I saved you this time. I wonder if I can ask you for a favor. Xia Yunting's heart tightened and his eyes turned cold. What do you want? Wei Wei Bai smiled and looked at the sky outside the window. Why don't I just die here? Xia Yunting couldn't bear to hear her talk about death. He angrily rebuked, Nonsense. Wei Wei Bai shook her head, looking tired. Grand Tutor, when you go back, you can directly ascend the throne. King Zhao definitely won't be able to defeat you. I also don't want to fight with you for the throne. So you found a reason to say that I died in this war and let me sneak away secretly. From then on, I have no status and can't fight with you for anything. Xia Yunting fiercely interrupted her. Where are you going? Wei Wei Bai put her hands behind her back, leisurely and leisurely. She gave him a gentle smile. This world is so big. I can go anywhere. Xia Yunting's voice trembled. You can't come to my side? Wei Wei Bai looked at him doubtfully. I thought Grand Tutor wanted me to die early. Xia Yunting bit his lip. The churning thoughts in his heart turned into the roar of a beast. She wanted to leave. She wanted to leave. This thought was almost like 1,000 cuts, making him unable to suppress the pain. Xia Yunting said word by word, If I don't agree, you won't light the fireworks, but just run away. Wei Wei Bai's eyes brightened. You know me, but... She suddenly turned around and lit the fireworks. Xia Yunting was stunned. Wei Wei Bai turned back, a sly smile on her face. Although threatening you is a good method, I still choose to believe you. Believe him? You will let me go, Xia Yunting. Xia Yunting only felt that these words were like a knife, cutting through his last bit of reason and chopping it to pieces. He heard himself calmly say, I do have a debt of gratitude, but to her. He wanted to bite the hand that fed him. Let her go, dream on. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 50. //. Chapter 300. Bai Weiwei heard his words and breathed a sigh of relief. Behind her, Xia Yunting's eyes were abnormally deep and dark. After the woodman finished gathering firewood, he went to sell it again. This was a desolate mountain range, and it took several hours to come and go. And that signal was probably because it was too far away. Those rescuers didn't know if it was too late or if they didn't see it. So for a moment, only Xia Yunting and Wei Wei Bai were left looking at each other in dismay. Wei Wei Bai suddenly said, I'm hungry. Xia Yunting looked around. There's only dry food. Dry food, in fact, was just a few pieces of flatbread that were hard enough to be used as rocks. Wei Wei Bai looked at those things, and with an expression of facing death, she took a bite of the flatbread. Her teeth almost broke. She covered her mouth, tears about to burst out. Xia Yunting saw her like this and tightly pursed his lips, trying not to let his ridicule be too obvious. He lightly coughed twice. You support me, go to the kitchen and see what's there. Although it was called a kitchen, it was actually just a simple area outside the thatched hut surrounded by a few broken walls. The things inside were pitifully little. A handful of wild vegetables, a few pieces of bacon, some pheasants from hunting, and some rice. This was probably the woodman's meal for several days. Xia Yunting clutched his waist, his legs weak. He sat on a chair in the kitchen and began to slowly wash the rice and vegetables. Injured, he could still cook? Wei Wei Bai obediently crouched next to him, looking at him with a face of worship, worthy of being the target of the attack, simply unreasonably strong, unscientific, and not letting people live. Because of his injury, all of his movements were slowed down. He hadn't cooked for many years, but when he was a child, cooking was not fun for him. It was survival. So even if he hadn't cooked for many years, Xia Yunting never lost his cooking skills. He finished cooking the rice and the soup, then turned back to see the little emperor sitting by the door. She was still wearing the woman's dress, and because her long hair was not in place, a few strands of hair fell on her snow-white face. There was no defense in her eyes, nor was there any attack. Instead, she looked at him with a clear and focused gaze. Even when he had succeeded in forcing her to abdicate, she had never looked at him like that. In the end, she was actually looking forward to cooking. Xia Yunting couldn't say what he was feeling in the end, but under those dark thoughts, for some reason, there was a hint of gentleness. They really looked like an ordinary couple. This thought shocked him, and he lowered his head in embarrassment. But he heard the little emperor's soft voice. Xia Yunting, is the meal ready? Xia Yunting didn't know why he blurted out, call me husband. The system was shocked. How thick-skinned. Could it be that the host would sell itself for a meal? What a dream. Just as he was thinking this, he heard his cold and elegant host calmly say, hubby. Wei Wei Bai felt that Xia Yunting's cooking was really good. It was such an ordinary thing, but he had a cheat aura when he did it. She couldn't help but exclaim, I didn't expect your culinary skills to be so good. Where did you learn it? Xia Yunting expressionlessly lay back on the bed. He held the bowl. Because of the pain from his wound, he didn't eat much. He heard the little emperor's question and was silent for a moment. Then he said, self-taught. Wei Wei Bai exclaimed, you're really talented. You're good at whatever you learn. Xia Yunting's heart was stirred again. How could there be someone who could be so natural and unconsciously provoke others? You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.